Some decisions change everything. Major Catherine Reynolds knew this as she gripped the controls of her F-22 Raptor, 50,000 feet above the Nevada desert, where the sky turned a shade of blue most people would never see. At 32, she had already made more life-or-death choices than most officers faced in an entire career, but none would compare to what was coming. In the cockpit, alone with her thoughts and the crushing force of a high-G turn, she had no idea that within 24 hours she would defy direct orders, risk everything she'd worked for, and finally understand the mother she'd lost 15 years ago. The desert air shimmered below, heat waves dancing like ghosts, as Catherine began the training exercise that would set everything in motion. Inside the cockpit, Major Catherine Storm Reynolds focused on her breathing, fighting the crushing pressure as she executed a high-G turn. The aircraft responded like an extension of her own body, banking sharply into a vertical climb that would render most pilots unconscious. "Eagle Squadron, this is Raptor 1. Storm's voice was measured and calm over the radio, betraying none of the strain her body endured. "Remember to maintain proper breathing technique during high-G maneuvers. Tensing your lower body helps prevent blackout. Demonstrate and acknowledge." 4 trainee pilots responded in sequence, their voices strained as they attempted to follow her lead through the punishing maneuvers. The 5th voice never came. "Hawkeye 3, acknowledge," Storm called, banking the Raptor to locate the missing aircraft. The familiar flutter of concern tightened her chest. Lieutenant Patterson was the youngest in her squadron, talented but overconfident. She spotted his aircraft 3,000 feet below, wobbling slightly. "Hawkeye 3, status report immediately." Patterson's voice came through faintly. "Raptor 1, experiencing control issues, pressure fluctuations in hydraulic system." Storm processed the information instantly. Hydraulic failure at this altitude and speed could be catastrophic. "Hawkeye 3, level out and reduce speed. I'm coming to you." She pushed the Raptor into a controlled dive, the G-forces pressing her hard against the seat. The heads-up display flashed warnings as she exceeded recommended descent rates, but Storm knew exactly how far she could push the aircraft. She'd been pushing boundaries her entire life. As she approached Patterson's struggling F-22, her warning system suddenly screamed to life. Caution indicators flashed across her own display, primary hydraulic pressure dropping rapidly. The stick shuddered in her hand, the aircraft suddenly feeling less like an extension of herself and more like a wounded animal fighting her control. "Eagle Squadron, this is Raptor 1. She maintained that same measured calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I am experiencing similar hydraulic failure. Mission abort. All aircraft return to Edwards. Hawkeye 3 and I will attempt emergency procedures." Storm knew what was coming. The moment the secondary hydraulic system engaged, the aircraft jerked violently. Fighting the controls now required every ounce of her strength. 9 Gs of force crushed down on her body, more than 9 times her body weight pressing against her chest, forcing blood from her brain. The edges of her vision darkened as consciousness began to slip away. "Not today, not on my watch." The anti-G straining maneuver was second nature after thousands of hours in the cockpit. She tensed every muscle from her feet to her abdomen, forcing short, sharp breaths that sounded almost like grunts. The blackness receded slightly. Just enough to keep flying. "Hawkeye 3, follow my lead exactly." Her voice was strained now, each word pushed out against the crushing pressure. "We're going to recover together, match my descent rate precisely." The Nevada desert below seemed to rise up to meet them, details emerging from what had been an abstract landscape moments before. Mountain ranges, dry lake beds, the distant glint of civilization. Patterson's aircraft still wobbled dangerously, but he was following her lead, matching her careful descent profile. "That's it, Lieutenant. Smooth and steady. Remember your training." The radio crackled with the voice of the Edwards Air Force Base controller. "Raptor 1, this is Edwards Control. Emergency response teams are standing by. You are cleared for priority landing on runway 22. "Copy, Edwards. Be advised Hawkeye 3 will land first. His hydraulic situation is deteriorating more rapidly." Storm guided both aircraft toward the runway, fighting her own struggling controls while talking Patterson through each adjustment. The younger pilot's voice grew steadier as they approached the airfield. His training was taking over, fear giving way to procedure. The moment his wheels touched down safely, Storm allowed herself one deep breath, now for her own landing, potentially the most challenging of her career. With partial hydraulic failure, the Raptor's sophisticated flight controls were compromised. The aircraft that normally responded to her slightest touch now fought her like a wild Mustang. The runway approached at alarming speed. Storm's arms burned with the effort of controlling the stick. The G-suit squeezed her lower body mercilessly as she executed a final turn to align with the runway. Her vision narrowed again, consciousness hanging by a thread as blood struggled to reach her brain. Not like this, not after everything. The wheels slammed onto concrete. The aircraft bounced once, twice, as Storm fought for control. Emergency braking engaged automatically. The world outside her canopy blurred as the Raptor decelerated violently. And then, finally, stillness. For several seconds, Storm simply breathed, allowing oxygen to flood back to her brain. She completed shutdown procedures mechanically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. By the time the canopy lifted, emergency vehicles surrounded her aircraft, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and white. "Major Reynolds," a ground technician approached as she descended the ladder. "Are you injured?" Storm removed her helmet, letting the desert air cool her sweat-soaked hair. "I'm fine. Check on Lieutenant Patterson first." The technician hesitated. "Lieutenant Patterson appears unharmed, ma'am. But Colonel Harrison is requesting your immediate presence in the command center." Storm paused, one foot still on the ladder. Colonel David Harrison was not directly in her chain of command. His presence at Edwards was unexpected. "Harrison?" The name carried weight. "That's it. From Strategic Command?" "Yes, ma'am. He said it's urgent." Storm nodded, masking her confusion. David Harrison was a legend in the Air Force, an ace pilot during Desert Storm, and now one of the most respected strategists in the military. He was also her father's oldest friend. The walk across the tarmac gave her time to compose herself. The adrenaline from the emergency landing still coursed through her veins, making her fingers tingle and her heart race. Whatever Harrison wanted, it wasn't about today's training mission. Something bigger was happening. The command center hummed with activity as Storm entered, still in her flight suit. Colonel Harrison stood by the central display, his tall frame unmistakable even from behind. At 68, he carried himself with the same rigid posture he'd maintained throughout his 40-year military career. "Colonel Harrison." Storm stood at attention, ignoring the lingering dizziness from the high-G maneuvers. Harrison turned, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "At ease, Storm. Impressive landing out there." "Thank you, sir." She relaxed slightly, but maintained her professional demeanor. "I wasn't aware you were at Edwards." "Just arrived." His eyes, still sharp despite the wrinkles surrounding them, studied her closely. "You look like your mother when she was your age. Same determination in the eyes." The comparison to her mother was unexpected. Few people mentioned Margaret Reynolds in her presence anymore, least of all her father's military colleagues. The loss, even 15 years later, remained an open wound. "You didn't come to Edwards to tell me that, sir." Harrison nodded, appreciating her directness. "Walk with me." They moved to a smaller briefing room adjacent to the command center. Harrison sealed the door and activated the security protocols that would prevent electronic eavesdropping. Whatever this was, it was classified. "I need a pilot for a sensitive operation," Harrison began without preamble. "Someone with exceptional skill, judgment, and discretion. Your name was at the top of my list." Storm maintained her composure, though surprise rippled through her. "May I ask what the operation entails?" Harrison activated the room's display system. A map of the Arizona-Mexico border appeared, highlighting a section of remote desert. "For the past 6 months, we've been tracking increased aerial activity along this border section. Small aircraft and drones, flying without transponders or flight plans. Drug runners," Storm concluded. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but with a concerning difference. The flight patterns show military precision. These aren't amateurs. Intelligence suggests the Cortez cartel has recruited former military pilots to run their operations." Storm studied the flight paths displayed on the screen. They were indeed methodical, avoiding radar coverage, utilizing terrain masking, maintaining optimal fuel efficiency. These were tactics taught in military flight schools. "What exactly would my role be, Colonel?" Harrison straightened, hands clasped behind his back. "You would lead a small covert surveillance team, F-22 Raptors modified with advanced reconnaissance equipment. Your objective would be to identify the aircraft, map their routes, and gather intelligence that could lead us to their bases of operation." Wouldn't this fall under Border Patrol or DEA jurisdiction? It would, typically. But the sophistication of these operations suggests something beyond standard drug trafficking. We have reason to believe sensitive military technology may be involved. Storm processed this information. A covert surveillance mission wasn't the typical assignment for a fighter pilot instructor. Why me specifically, sir? There are pilots with more reconnaissance experience. Harrison's expression softened slightly, a rarity for the stoic commander. Because you have something they don't, Storm. You have your mother's instincts and your father's precision. And because I trust you to make the right decisions when plans inevitably go sideways. The mention of her parents together created a conflicted feeling in Storm's chest. Her relationship with her father had grown increasingly strained since her mother's death. Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds, decorated war hero, current commandant of the Air Force Academy, and a man who seemed perpetually disappointed in his only child. Does my father know about this assignment? Something flickered across Harrison's face, discomfort perhaps. He was consulted. Storm understood the unspoken message. Her father had objected. And? Harrison sighed, dropping some of his formal demeanor. Robert expressed concerns about your suitability for this type of operation. The words stung, though they weren't surprising. He thinks I'm too emotional, too impulsive. He thinks you're too much like your mother. Harrison's voice carried no judgment, merely stating fact. And Margaret was many things, brilliant, compassionate, determined, but she wasn't always one to follow procedure to the letter. Storm turned away, focusing on the border map rather than meeting Harrison's gaze. Her father's disapproval was a familiar weight, one she'd carried for years. And you disagree with his assessment? I wouldn't be here if I did. Harrison moved beside her, studying the map. The qualities Robert sees as liabilities, I see as assets. This mission will require adaptability and intuition as much as discipline. Storm considered the offer, weighing the professional opportunity against the personal complications. A successful mission could advance her career significantly. It would also be a chance to prove her father wrong, to show that being like her mother wasn't a weakness. When would this operation begin? Immediately. You'd report to Fort Huachuca tomorrow. Your team is already assembled. Small, but elite. Captain James Martinez will be your second in command. Martinez? The name was familiar. Former SEAL who transferred to Air Force? Harrison nodded. The same. Exceptional officer with extensive counter-narcotics experience. You'll also have Technical Sergeant Jennifer Park handling your ground-based intelligence and surveillance systems. A thought occurred to Storm. If my father objected, who approved this assignment? I did. Harrison met her gaze directly. Robert and I have been friends for 40 years, but we don't always agree, especially when it comes to you. The statement hung in the air between them. Storm sensed there was more to the story. Layers of history and complexity that remained unspoken. I'll need to review the mission parameters and intelligence reports before making a decision. Harrison nodded, unsurprised by her caution. All the information is available in the secure briefing room next door. Take the time you need. But Storm... His voice softened slightly. This mission matters, not just for national security, but for the people living in these border communities. The cartels are destroying lives. She recognized the gravity in his tone. This wasn't just another assignment. I understand, sir. I'll give you some privacy to review the materials. Harrison moved toward the door, then paused. Storm, whatever you decide, whatever your father might say, you're an exceptional pilot, one of the best I've ever seen. The compliment, coming from a man of Harrison's stature, carried weight. Storm nodded her acknowledgement, maintaining her professional composure until the door closed behind him. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to process. The emergency landing, the unexpected meeting, the complicated web of relationships that seemed to follow her throughout her career. She pulled up a chair and began reviewing the mission files, determined to make her decision based on facts, not emotions. The surveillance footage was concerning, small aircraft slipping across the border under cover of darkness, drones operating well beyond civilian capabilities. The pattern of incursions had increased by 300% in the past 3 months, and standard interdiction efforts had proved ineffective. 2 hours later, Storm had made her decision. She found Harrison in the officer's lounge, gazing out at the flight line where maintenance crews swarmed around her damaged F-22. I'll take the assignment, she said without preamble. Harrison nodded, as if he'd never doubted her acceptance. Wheels up at 0600. You'll be briefed on the full operational details when you reach Fort Huachuca. Yes, sir. Storm hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering. Colonel, is there something you're not telling me about this mission? Harrison's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. What makes you ask that? Instinct, this feels personal for you. A tight smile crossed the older man's face. Your mother asked the same kind of questions, always looking beyond the briefing. He sighed. Let's just say I have a vested interest in seeing the Cortez cartel's operations disrupted. They've caused enough damage. The answer was deliberately vague, but Storm knew better than to press further. She would learn more in time. Get some rest, Major, Harrison said, his formal tone returning. Tomorrow begins a new chapter. The desert dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and gold as Storm's transport aircraft approached Fort Huachuca. The landscape below transitioned from the flat expanses of Nevada to the rugged mountains of southern Arizona. In the distance, the Mexican border stretched like a scar across the terrain. The military installation came into view, a complex of buildings and runways nestled against the Huachuca Mountains. As a covert operation base, it combined Army intelligence facilities with Air Force capabilities, all within striking distance of the border. Storm disembarked into the dry morning heat, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. A young lieutenant waited at the bottom of the stairs. Major Reynolds? Lieutenant Morrison, ma'am. I'm to escort you to the briefing. Lead the way, Lieutenant. They walked across the tarmac toward a nondescript building at the edge of the airfield. Storm noticed the increased security presence, armed personnel at every entrance, surveillance cameras covering all approaches. Whatever was happening here warranted significant protection. Inside the building, Storm was led to a conference room where 3 people waited. She recognized Captain James Martinez immediately. The former Navy SEAL's reputation preceded him. At 43, he was older than most captains, his late transfer to the Air Force having cost him some rank. His weathered face and watchful eyes spoke of extensive combat experience. Beside him sat a young woman in Air Force uniform whom Storm assumed was Technical Sergeant Jennifer Park. The intelligence specialist couldn't be more than 25, but her posture and alert expression suggested sharp competence. The third person was unexpected, Colonel Harrison himself, having apparently arrived on an earlier flight. Major Reynolds, Harrison nodded in greeting. You've made good time. Please, have a seat. Storm settled into the remaining chair, noting the thick folders in front of each place. I wasn't expecting to see you here, Colonel. I'll be overseeing the initial phase of the operation personally, Harrison replied. Allow me to formally introduce your team. Captain James Martinez, former SEAL Team 6, now Air Force Special Operations. Martinez nodded, his assessment of Storm evident in his gaze. Major. And Technical Sergeant Jennifer Park, our intelligence and surveillance specialist. Graduated top of her class at the Air Force Intelligence School. Park straightened slightly. An honor to work with you, Major Reynolds. Storm acknowledged them both, then turned her attention back to Harrison. I assume there's more to this operation than what was in the preliminary briefing. There is. Harrison activated the room's display system. Satellite imagery of the border region appeared, overlaid with flight paths and timestamps. For the past 6 months, we've tracked increasing activity by the Cortez cartel. They've expanded beyond traditional drug smuggling into weapons, technology, and human trafficking. Martinez leaned forward. What makes this case unique is their aerial capabilities. The cartel has acquired military-grade drones and light aircraft, along with pilots trained in evasive tactics. Park added, our analysis indicates they're using a sophisticated relay system to control the drones from multiple locations, making them nearly impossible to track back to their source. Storm studied the patterns on the display. And traditional interdiction methods have failed? Completely, Harrison confirmed. Border Patrol aircraft are too slow, too obvious. By the time they respond, the cartel aircraft have already disappeared across the border. Which is where we come in. Storm connected the dots. The F-22 stealth capabilities would allow us to track these flights without being detected. Precisely. Harrison nodded approvingly. Your aircraft have been modified with enhanced surveillance equipment. You'll maintain high altitude, observing and recording cartel flight patterns without engaging. This is strictly an intelligence-gathering operation. Storm noted the emphasis on the last point. No direct intervention. None. Harrison's tone was firm. Your presence in Mexican airspace would constitute an international incident. You are to remain on the U.S. side of the border at all times. Martinez's expression suggested he'd had this conversation before. even if we witness criminal activity in progress. Even then, Harrison looked between them. We're playing the long game here, building a comprehensive intelligence picture that will allow coordinated action with Mexican authorities. One successful interdiction isn't worth compromising the entire operation. Storm understood the reasoning, though it chafed against her instincts. Watching crimes occur without intervening would test her restraint. When do we begin? Tonight! Harrison opened one of the folders, revealing flight plans and coordinate sets. You and Captain Martinez will conduct your first reconnaissance flight at 2200 hours. The cartel typically moves their shipments under cover of darkness. The briefing continued for another hour, detailing communication protocols, emergency procedures, and intelligence objectives. Throughout, Storm noticed Martinez watching her, his expression unreadable. As Harrison concluded the briefing, he addressed the tension directly. I know what you're thinking, Captain Martinez. Why choose a fighter pilot instructor for this mission, instead of someone with more reconnaissance experience? Martinez maintained his professional demeanor. The question had crossed my mind, sir. Harrison smiled slightly. Major Reynolds has unique qualifications. Her father is Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds. Storm stiffened at the implication. Sir, Harrison raised a hand, stopping her protest. I mention this not because of nepotism, but because Storm has something invaluable. She grew up understanding military strategy at the highest levels. She thinks like her father, one of our finest strategic minds. But she acts like her mother, who had an uncanny ability to adapt when situations deteriorated. The personal assessment hung in the air. Martinez studied Storm with renewed interest, while Park looked between them curiously. Now, Harrison continued, you have 6 hours before your first flight. Get familiar with the modified aircraft, review the intelligence, and get some rest if possible. Dismissed. As they filed out of the briefing room, Martinez fell into step beside Storm. His expression had softened somewhat, though wariness remained. You flew through that hydraulic failure yesterday like it was a training exercise, he said, referencing the incident at Edwards. Word travels fast in our circles. Storm appreciated the professional acknowledgement. It wasn't my first emergency landing. I've seen your record. Martinez's tone was measured. 3 distinguished flying crosses by age 30 is impressive. But this mission isn't about aerial combat skills. You're concerned about my experience with surveillance operations. I'm concerned about having a partner who might prioritize heroics over mission parameters. His bluntness was refreshing in its way. Harrison obviously sees something in you. I'm reserving judgment. Storm stopped walking, facing the former SEAL directly. I understand your concerns, Captain. But let me be clear. I follow orders. I complete missions. Whatever preconceptions you have based on my family name or my combat record, I suggest you set them aside until you've seen me work. Martinez held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Fair enough, Major. Let's go see these modified Raptors. The maintenance hangar housed 2 F-22s, their sleek forms partially disassembled as technicians installed the specialized surveillance equipment. Storm walked around the nearest aircraft, noting the modifications to the weapons bay, now housing sophisticated cameras and sensors instead of missiles. The optical package gives us night vision, infrared, and multispectral imaging capabilities, Park explained, having joined them in the hangar. Everything you observe will be transmitted in real time to my station, where I'll analyze and catalog the data. Storm ran her hand along the Raptor's fuselage. Any impact on performance? Minimal, the chief mechanic answered, approaching from behind a workbench. You'll notice slightly reduced acceleration due to the added weight, but nothing that compromises the aircraft's essential capabilities. Good. Storm turned to Martinez. Have you flown an F-22 before, Captain? A slight smile crossed his face. My transition training to Air Force included F-22 certification. I'm not as experienced as you, but I can handle the aircraft. The rest of the afternoon passed in preparation. Storm and Martinez reviewed maps of the border region, memorizing terrain features and possible landing zones in case of emergency. Park briefed them on known cartel patterns and high-probability surveillance areas. As evening approached, Storm found a quiet moment to call her father. It wasn't a conversation she looked forward to, but protocol and personal obligation demanded it. The call connected to his office at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Catherine. Robert Reynolds never used her call sign. His voice carried the same authoritative tone he used with cadets. I was wondering when you'd call. Hello, Father. Storm kept her tone neutral. I assume Colonel Harrison informed you of my assignment? He did. The disapproval was evident even through the phone connection. I made my objections clear. Storm had expected this reaction, but it stung nonetheless. May I ask why? My record qualifies me for this mission. A heavy sigh came through the line. Your record shows exceptional flying skills. It also shows a pattern of risk-taking that concerns me. This mission requires restraint and discipline, qualities you don't believe I possess. The statement came out more bitter than she'd intended. Catherine, her father's voice softened slightly, surprising her. My concern isn't about your abilities. It's about your safety. The Cortez cartel doesn't play by any rules. If they detect your surveillance, they won't hesitate to respond with force. The rare display of paternal concern caught Storm off guard. I understand the risks. Do you? His tone hardened again. You've always been like your mother, seeing the mission, not the danger. It's what made her an exceptional doctor. It's also what killed her. The reference to her mother's death, a car accident while rushing to aid a wounded soldier, reopened old wounds. Storm had been 17 when it happened, and the loss had fundamentally altered her relationship with her father. I need to prepare for tonight's flight. Storm deflected, unwilling to revisit that painful territory. I'll update you when I can. Catherine, her father's voice stopped her before she could end the call. Just be careful, follow protocols, don't try to be a hero. Yes, sir. The formal response came automatically. Goodbye, father. Storm ended the call, the familiar mixture of frustration and longing settling in her chest. Every conversation with her father seemed to follow the same pattern, his concern manifesting as criticism, her defiance masking a desire for approval. 15 years since her mother's death, and they still couldn't find their way back to the relationship they'd once had. The desert night settled over Fort Huachuca as Storm and Martinez prepared for their first surveillance flight. The air had cooled considerably, stars emerging in a clear sky that would provide excellent visibility for their mission. In the locker room, Storm zipped up her flight suit and checked her equipment methodically. Martinez did the same nearby, his movements reflecting years of pre-mission rituals from his SEAL days. First flight together, he commented, adjusting his G-suit. Any preferences I should know about? Storm appreciated the professional courtesy. I fly by the book until the book doesn't work. Then I improvise. A slight smile crossed Martinez's face. That's more honest than most officers would be. Honesty between pilots keeps you alive. Storm checked her oxygen mask and communication system. What about you? Any SEAL habits I should be aware of? I'm used to swimming with sharks. Martinez zipped up his flight suit. The air is just another ocean, with different predators. The metaphor was apt. They would be hunting tonight, tracking predators who didn't know they were being watched. The predators who, if alerted, would become extremely dangerous. They walked to the flight line together, the modified F-22s waiting on the tarmac like shadowy predators of their own. Maintenance crews performed final checks under subdued lighting. In the Mission Control Center, Technical Sergeant Park established communications as Storm and Martinez completed their pre-flight checks. Colonel Harrison observed from behind her station, his expression betraying none of the concern he must have felt launching this sensitive operation. Raptor 1, systems check complete, Storm reported, her voice calm and professional. Ready for mission parameters. Raptor 2, systems green across the board, Martinez added. Park's voice came through their headsets. Raptors 1 and 2, you are cleared for takeoff. Primary surveillance area is designated Sector Bravo. Coordinates uploading to your navigation systems now. Copy that. Storm began taxiing toward the runway, Martinez's F-22 following behind. Maintaining radio silence once airborne unless absolutely necessary. The takeoff was textbook, both aircraft ascending rapidly into the night sky. Storm felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the Raptor climbed, the ground falling away below. This was where she belonged, in the cockpit, defying gravity, master of her domain. At 30,000 feet, they leveled off and activated the stealth systems that would make them nearly invisible to conventional radar. The border stretched below them, a political line carved through natural landscape. On the American side, scattered lights marked small towns and border patrol stations. The Mexican side appeared darker, with fewer signs of development in this remote region. Storm activated the surveillance systems, powerful cameras and sensors beginning to record activity below. For nearly an hour, they observed normal patterns. Occasional Border Patrol vehicles, a few civilian cars on remote highways, nothing suspicious. Then, at precisely 23:17, Park's voice broke the silence. Raptor 1, we have movement at coordinate set Delta 3. Infrared showing small aircraft, no transponder, approaching from the south. Storm adjusted her course subtly, positioning for better observation while maintaining stealth profile. Copy. Moving to intercept flight path. Through the enhanced vision systems, she identified a light aircraft flying without navigation lights, maintaining an altitude of just a few hundred feet, well below normal air traffic and radar coverage. The aircraft's path took it directly across the border into U.S. airspace. Raptor 1 to control, confirming unauthorized border crossing. Single-engine aircraft, possibly a modified Cessna, no visible identification markings. Roger, Raptor 1, Park responded. Maintain observation, track flight path and probable destination. Storm followed the smuggler aircraft, careful to maintain sufficient distance to avoid detection. The surveillance cameras captured high-resolution images as the plane descended toward what appeared to be an abandoned airstrip in the desert, approximately 20 miles north of the border. Control, target aircraft is preparing to land at what appears to be a disused airfield. Coordinates transmitting now. Receiving data, Raptor 1, Park confirmed. Border Patrol has been notified of the location. Storm watched as the smuggler aircraft touched down on the crude runway. Through the infrared system, she could see 3 figures emerge from the plane, unloading what appeared to be packages, likely drugs, into a waiting vehicle. Activity consistent with smuggling operation, she reported. 3 individuals, 1 vehicle, estimated 8 to 10 packages being transferred. Copy, Raptor 1. Continue surveillance. The operation proceeded below, the smugglers working efficiently in the darkness, unaware of the advanced technology tracking their every move from above. Storm felt a surge of satisfaction. Their first mission was yielding valuable intelligence already. Then everything changed. Raptor 1, we have additional movement. Park's voice held an edge of urgency. Multiple heat signatures approaching the airfield from the east. Appears to be armed individuals. Storm adjusted the surveillance focus, identifying a group of at least 6 people moving tactically toward the airstrip. Their movement suggested military or paramilitary training. Not random criminals, but a coordinated unit. Control, this looks like an ambush in progress, possibly rival cartel members. Continue observation, Raptor 1. Do not engage. Storm watched as the new group surrounded the airstrip, taking positions behind rocks and sparse vegetation. The original smugglers, still unloading their cargo, remained oblivious to the approaching threat. Through the high-resolution cameras, Storm could now make out more details. The ambushers carried military-style weapons. The original smugglers included what appeared to be a man and 3 children. Children? Control, be advised. The targets now appear to include minors. I count 3 children with the primary suspect. A momentary silence from Control. Then Harrison's voice broke through. Confirmed, Raptor 1. We're seeing the same. Maintain position and continue observation. Something wasn't right. Drug smugglers didn't typically bring children on operations. Storm adjusted the surveillance focus, zooming in on the scene below. The man was moving with purpose, but also protectiveness, keeping the children close as they transferred packages from the aircraft to what appeared to be a hidden compartment in their vehicle. The oldest child couldn't be more than 12, the youngest perhaps 6. Raptor 1 to Control, I'm not convinced this is a standard smuggling operation. The adult's behavior toward the minors suggests a familial relationship. Before Control could respond, the situation escalated dramatically. The ambush team emerged from cover, weapons raised, surrounding the man and children. Even from altitude, Storm could see the terror as the children huddled behind the adult. Control, subjects are now under direct threat. Armed individuals have surrounded them. Harrison's voice came through clearly. Understood, Raptor 1. Border Patrol has been notified. ETA to location approximately 15 minutes. Storm watched the scene unfold with growing tension. 15 minutes would be too late. The ambushers had the man and children at gunpoint now. One of the younger children had collapsed to the ground, clearly terrified. Sir, those children don't have 15 minutes. Her voice remained professional, but urgency underlined every word. Maintain position, Major. Harrison's tone left no room for debate. This is an intelligence-gathering mission only. Direct intervention would compromise everything. Storm understood the parameters. She knew the reasoning. Yet as she watched the armed men begin to separate the children from the adult, something deep within her rebelled against the orders. Martinez's voice came through on their private channel. Storm, I know what you're thinking, but we have explicit orders. Those children are about to die or be trafficked. Storm's response was quiet but intense. You know it as well as I do. We don't know the full situation. Martinez countered Sid, though doubt tinged his voice. The man could be a smuggler using children as cover. Storm continued observing through the high-resolution cameras. The adult male was standing between the children and the armed men, his posture protective rather than criminal. One of the ambushers struck him with a rifle butt, sending him to his knees. Control, situation deteriorating rapidly. Subjects appear to be in imminent danger. Understood, Raptor 1, Harrison responded, tension evident in his voice. We're attempting to expedite Border Patrol response. Below, one of the armed men grabbed the smallest child, dragging the screaming youngster toward a separate vehicle. The man lunged forward desperately, only to be struck again and held at gunpoint. In that moment, Storm made her decision. Raptor 1 to control, I'm executing a show of force maneuver. Negative, Raptor 1. Harrison's voice sharpened. Maintain position. That is a direct order. Sir, with respect, those children have seconds, not minutes. Storm's tone remained steady as she banked the F-22 into a dive. I'm not engaging targets. Executing non-lethal deterrent only. Martinez's voice came through, surprisingly supportive. Raptor 2 following Raptor 1's lead. The two F-22s descended rapidly, Storm leading them into a precisely calculated approach. At exactly the right moment, she pushed the Raptor through the sound barrier, creating a thunderous sonic boom directly over the airstrip. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The sudden, overwhelming sound echoed across the desert like artillery fire. The armed ambushers scattered in panic, several dropping their weapons as they dove for cover. In the confusion, the man grabbed all three children and rushed them toward the vehicle. Targets dispersing, Storm reported calmly, banking the F-22 around for another pass. Adult male and children retreating to their vehicle. She executed a second pass, lower this time, the Raptor's engines roaring in the night sky. The psychological impact was devastating to the ambushers, who clearly believed they were under military attack. They fled to their vehicles, abandoning their operation entirely. Ambush team retreating, Storm confirmed, watching as the last of the armed men disappeared into the darkness. Primary subjects secure in their vehicle, departing eastbound. The radio silence from control spoke volumes. Storm knew she had directly violated orders, potentially compromising the entire operation. As she climbed back to cruising altitude, she prepared herself for the consequences. Raptor 1, return to base immediately. Harrison's voice, when it finally came, was coldly professional. Mission abort. Repeat, mission abort. Copy control, returning to base. As they flew back toward Fort Huachuca, Martinez opened a private channel. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen a pilot do, possibly both. Storm maintained her focus on flying. I made a judgment call. You disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer. I did. A pause, then Martinez spoke again. For what it's worth, I would have done the same. Those kids wouldn't have survived otherwise. The acknowledgement meant something, coming from a former SEAL who understood life or death decisions. Thank you, Captain, but I don't think Colonel Harrison will share your perspective. The landing at Fort Huachuca was tense, the normal post-flight procedures conducted in rigid silence. As Storm descended from her aircraft, she saw Colonel Harrison waiting on the tarmac, his expression thunderous. My office, now. His words were clipped, brooking no argument. Storm followed him across the airfield, Martinez trailing behind. The walking gave her time to organize her thoughts, to prepare her defensive actions she knew were indefensible by military standards. Harrison's office was Spartan, with little personal decoration beyond framed commendations and a single photograph of a younger Harrison standing alongside Robert Reynolds in desert combat uniforms. Iraq, most likely, during the First Gulf War. Explain yourself, Major. Harrison didn't sit, instead standing behind his desk, ramrod straight. Storm stood at attention, meeting his gaze directly. Sir, I observe civilians, including children, in imminent danger. Border Patrol's response time would have been insufficient. I executed a non-lethal intervention to provide the civilians an opportunity to escape. You directly violated my orders. Harrison's voice was controlled but intense. You potentially compromised a multi-agency operation months in the planning. Your actions revealed our surveillance capabilities to the cartels. Yes, sir. Harrison's eyes narrowed at her simple acknowledgement. That's it? Yes, sir? No elaborate justification? I made a judgment call based on the immediate threat to civilian lives, sir. I accept full responsibility and any consequences. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then turned to Martinez. And you, Captain? You followed Major Reynolds' lead rather than maintaining mission parameters. Martinez stood equally straight. I supported my commanding officer's decision, sir. The situation on the ground warranted immediate intervention. A complex emotion flickered across Harrison's face, something between frustration and grudging respect. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Send her in. Moments later, the office door opened to admit Technical Sergeant Park, carrying a tablet. The preliminary analysis, sir. Show them. Harrison gestured toward Storm and Martinez. Park activated the tablet's display, projecting images onto the office wall. They were enhanced still frames from the surveillance footage, focusing on the man and children Storm had intervened to protect. Facial recognition has identified the adult male as Miguel Sanchez, Park explained, her voice professionally neutral. He's a DEA agent working deep cover in the Cortez cartel. Storm felt a cold shock run through her. DEA? He's one of ours? For the past 3 years, Harrison confirmed, his anger seemingly tempered now. Sanchez has been our most valuable asset inside the cartel. The children are his. His wife was killed by the cartel 2 years ago, when they discovered she knew about his true identity. The cartel took his children hostage, Martinez concluded, connecting the dots. Yes, tonight was apparently Sanchez's attempt to extract his children from cartel territory. Harrison leaned against his desk. The ambush team was cartel enforcers sent to stop him. Storm processed this information, the full weight of her actions taking on new dimension. If we hadn't intervened, Sanchez and his children would likely be dead. Harrison finished her thought. Which doesn't change the fact that you disobeyed direct orders, Major. No, sir, it doesn't. Storm maintained her composure, though relief battled with continued concern inside her. What happens now to Sanchez and his children? Harrison sighed, some of his rigid formality falling away. We're attempting to locate them. Sanchez knows extraction protocols, but he's in a desperate situation with 3 children in tow. His training would tell him to go to ground, avoid all contact. But the cartel will be hunting them, Martinez pointed out, with resources on both sides of the border. Precisely. Harrison turned back to Storm. Which brings us to your punishment, Major. Storm braced herself. Violation of direct orders during a classified operation could end her career. At minimum, she expected to be removed from the mission and placed under formal review. You're being reassigned, Harrison stated. I understand, sir. To a search and extraction operation. Harrison continued, surprising her. Your new mission is to locate Sanchez and his children before the cartel does, and bring them safely to protective custody. Storm couldn't hide her surprise. Sir? Harrison's expression softened slightly. You created this situation, Major. Now you get to fix it. Besides, Sanchez is more likely to trust the pilot who saved his children than a standard extraction team. Yes, sir. Storm processed this unexpected turn. What about the original surveillance mission? It continues under Captain Martinez's command. Harrison looked to the former SEAL. With strict adherence to protocols this time, Martinez nodded. Understood, sir. Major Reynolds, you'll have a modified mission team and resources. Harrison turned back to her. Technical Sergeant Park will provide intelligence support for both operations. You deploy at 00600. Thank you, sir. Storm knew this assignment wasn't truly a reprieve. It was perhaps even more dangerous than the original mission. But it was a chance to make things right. Don't thank me yet. Harrison's tone hardened again. There's one more complication. I've been ordered to inform your father of tonight's events. The statement hit Storm like a physical blow. Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds would see this as confirmation of everything he believed about her. Impulsive, emotional, lacking discipline. I understand, sir. She maintained her professional demeanor despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. Dismissed. Harrison turned away. Get some rest while you can. Tomorrow will be challenging. Storm and Martinez left the office together, walking in silence until they reached the dormitory building. Martinez finally spoke as they reached the hallway junction where they would separate. Your father's going to hear about this. It wasn't a question, but Storm nodded anyway. Yes. Martinez studied her for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Not the safe call, not the by-the-book call, but the right one. Thank you. Storm appreciated the support, especially knowing what was coming. Good night, Captain. Good night, Major. Alone in her temporary quarters, Storm finally allowed herself to process the events of the night, the mission, the children, the decision that might have saved lives while jeopardizing her career, the knowledge that her father would soon learn of her insubordination. She sat on the edge of the bed, removing her flight suit mechanically. On impulse, she reached for her secure phone. The call would be unpleasant, but better to face it directly than wait for her father's inevitable reaction. 3 rings, then Robert Reynolds' voice, alert despite the late hour. "Catherine, I was about to call you." "So you've heard." Storm kept her voice steady. "Colonel Harrison informed me of your situation." Her father's tone was carefully controlled. "He said you disobeyed direct orders during a classified operation." "I did." No excuses, no justifications. There were children in danger. A heavy silence stretched between them. When Robert spoke again, his voice carried a weariness that surprised her. "You sound exactly like your mother. She would say the same thing, in exactly that tone." The comparison was unexpected. Her father rarely mentioned her mother, and never in relation to Storm's military career. "Is that a criticism?" She asked quietly. Another pause. "Margaret would have made the same choice you did. Rules meant nothing to her when lives were at stake." A subtle shift in his breathing suggested he was moving, perhaps to a study window, a habit when troubled. It was what made her exceptional as a doctor. It was also what made her dangerous to herself. Storm absorbed this rare insight into her mother. "The mission parameters changed when I saw those children." "The mission parameters are set for a reason, Catherine." Her father's voice hardened again. "You're not the only one in the field. Your decisions affect broader operations, other agents, strategic objectives." "I understand that." "Do you?" The question echoed their earlier conversation. "This isn't the first time you've substituted your judgment for established procedure. It's becoming a pattern." Storm felt the familiar frustration rising. Sometimes procedure doesn't account for the realities on the ground. And sometimes individual officers don't see the complete strategic picture, her father countered. "That's why we have chain of command. That's why we follow orders." The fundamental disagreement between them, one that had colored their relationship since Storm entered the Air Force, reasserted itself. Robert Reynolds believed in systems, procedures, the collective wisdom of established protocols. Storm believed in human judgment, adaptability, the necessity of individual decision-making in crisis. "Colonel Harrison has assigned me to extract Agent Sanchez and his children," Storm said, changing the subject slightly. "I know." Her father's tone suggested he didn't entirely approve of this decision either. "It's a dangerous assignment. I created the situation. It's appropriate that I resolve it." Robert sighed audibly. "Just be careful, Catherine. The Cortez cartel doesn't forgive, and they don't forget. They'll be hunting Sanchez with everything they have." The genuine concern in his voice caught Storm off guard. "I will be." "Your mother," Robert began, then stopped himself. When he continued, his voice carried an emotional weight Storm rarely heard. "Margaret died helping someone. She broke protocol, left a secure area during an active threat situation to reach a wounded soldier. The official report called it a traffic accident. It wasn't. It was an insurgent attack. She knew the risks. She went anyway." The revelation stunned Storm into silence. For 15 years, she'd believed her mother died in a simple car accident, a tragic but ordinary event. Now, in the span of a single sentence, her understanding of her mother's death had transformed completely. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally managed to ask. "Would it have changed anything?" Her father's question carried 15 years of grief. Would knowing she died a hero make losing her any easier? Or would it just encourage you to follow the same path? To believe that rules don't matter when something important is at stake? Storm had no answer. The parallels between her actions tonight and what she'd just learned about her mother's death were too stark, too painful to process immediately. "I need to prepare for tomorrow's mission," she said finally. "Yes." Her father seemed equally relieved to end the conversation. "Good luck, Catherine. Come home safely." "I will." Storm hesitated, then added, "Good night, Father." The call ended, leaving Storm alone with the echoes of revelation. Her mother hadn't died in a random accident. She'd died making exactly the kind of choice Storm had made tonight, putting others before herself, breaking rules to save lives. For years, Storm had modeled herself after what she believed her father wanted, a disciplined by-the-book officer who could rise through the ranks as he had. Now she wondered if she'd been following the wrong parent all along. Perhaps the qualities that made her father see her as impulsive and emotional were actually her mother's legacy, a willingness to act when others hesitated, to value lives over procedures. The desert night deepened outside her window as Storm prepared for the extraction mission ahead. Somewhere out there, a desperate father and his 3 children were running for their lives, hunted by a cartel that would show no mercy. Finding them would require all her skills as a pilot and officer. But first, she needed to understand herself, the daughter of Robert Reynolds' discipline and Margaret Reynolds' compassion. Somewhere between those inheritances lay the officer she needed to become to complete this mission and bring everyone home alive. Storm checked her equipment one final time, then lay down for a few hours of rest. Tomorrow would test everything she believed about herself, about duty, about what it meant to serve. As sleep finally claimed her, her last thought was of her mother, the woman whose death she'd misunderstood for 15 years, but whose spirit, it seemed, had been guiding her all along. Desert sunrise painted the landscape in amber and gold as Storm stood watching ground crews prepare her aircraft. Not the F-22 Raptor she was accustomed to, but a modified UH-60 Blackhawk for the extraction mission ahead. The rotor blades gleamed in the morning light, deadly and purposeful. Captain Michael Stevens approached, a veteran with special operations experience. "Ready for a different kind of flying today, Major?" Storm studied the helicopter with a critical eye. "Been a while since I piloted rotary wing, but some skills you never forget." 4 Special Forces operators arrived, moving with the quiet efficiency of men accustomed to danger. Their leader, Master Sergeant Johnson, extended his hand. Salt and pepper beard framed a face weathered by decades of service. "My team's briefed and ready, Major." His grip was firm, his gaze evaluating. "Just point us at the objective." In the operations center, Technical Sergeant Park had transformed a standard briefing room into a high-tech command post. Satellite imagery, terrain maps, and weather systems filled multiple displays. Colonel Harrison stood by the main screen with a man Storm didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, but the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "Major Reynolds," Harrison gestured her over. "Deputy Director Garcia, DEA Southwest Division. Sanchez's handler." Garcia's face reflected exhaustion and concern. "Miguel Sanchez isn't just any agent. He's penetrated deeper into the Cortez organization than anyone before him. What he knows could dismantle their entire North American operation. And 3 children are caught in the middle," Storm added. Garcia nodded grimly. "The cartel took them hostage when they suspected him. That's why he ran." Park activated the main display, highlighting 3 potential areas where Sanchez might seek shelter. Based on his training and the presence of children, he'll prioritize water sources and defensible positions. We've mapped all possibilities within a 50-mile radius of last night's incident. "What about extraction protocols?" Storm asked. "Where would he normally go if compromised?" "All standard safe houses are likely compromised," Garcia replied. "The Cortez cartel has informants throughout local law enforcement and border communities. That's part of what makes them so dangerous." "And why Sanchez's intelligence is so valuable," Harrison added. "He's mapped their entire influence network." The briefing continued, covering equipment, communications protocols, and contingency plans. Throughout, Storm felt responsibility settling onto her shoulders like physical weight. This wasn't just about rectifying her previous insubordination. It was about saving 4 lives from a cartel known for brutal retribution. "The cartel has mobilized significant resources," Harrison concluded. "We have reports of at least 3 helicopter teams operating from Mexico, and ground teams already crossing the border." "They want him that badly?" Stevens asked. Garcia's expression darkened. "In their culture, betrayal demands the harshest punishment, and they don't distinguish between targets and family." As the team dispersed to complete final preparations, Harrison signaled Storm to remain behind. His expression turned grave. "I received word from the Pentagon this morning," he said when they were alone. "Your father is on his way here." Storm stiffened. "Lieutenant General Reynolds is coming to Fort Huachuca." "He insisted on being briefed personally." Harrison sighed. "This doesn't change your mission. Find Sanchez and his children before the cartel does." "Yes, sir." Storm maintained her professional demeanor despite the complication her father's presence would add. "He's worried about you," Harrison added, his tone softening. "In his own way." Storm nodded, unwilling to discuss her complicated relationship with her father. "If that's all, sir, I should join my team." Harrison handed her a sealed envelope. "If you find Sanchez, give him this. Verification code proving you're legitimate. He's been undercover so long he'll be suspicious of anyone claiming to be American military." Outside, the morning heat intensified as Storm walked toward the waiting helicopter. The extraction team performed weapons checks while Stevens completed pre-flight inspection. Park approached, carrying a secure tablet. "I've downloaded all intelligence files," she said. "The system will update automatically if we receive new information." "Weather conditions?" Storm asked, scanning the latest satellite imagery. "Storm front moving in from the south, expected by late afternoon. Wind speeds up to 30 knots, possible flash flooding in low-lying areas." Another layer of urgency. Storm climbed into the cockpit, settling into the pilot's seat. The Black Hawk felt different from her Raptor. Heavier, more deliberate in its responses, but powerful in its own way. "Fort Huachuca Control, Extraction 1 ready for departure," Storm announced as the engine spooled up. "Extraction 1 cleared for departure, Godspeed." The helicopter lifted smoothly, the familiar but distinct sensations of rotary wing flight returning to her muscle memory. Storm banked the aircraft toward their first search area, feeling the machine respond to her commands. "How long since you flew one of these?" Stevens asked, monitoring the instruments. 18 months, Storm replied, hands steady on the controls as she increased their speed. "But like riding a bike, a very complicated lethal bike." The desert landscape expanded below them. Harsh, beautiful terrain of mountains, canyons, and expansive flats studded with saguaro cacti. In another context, Storm might have appreciated its stark beauty. Now she scanned it with tactical eyes, looking for any sign of human movement. "First search area 12 minutes out," Stevens reported. "Abandoned mining complex. Satellite imagery shows several structures still standing. Good sightlines for defense, nearby spring for water." "Exactly where I'd go with children to protect," Storm agreed. "Johnson, prepare your team for insertion. Aerial reconnaissance first, then ground approach if the site appears secure." "Roger that." "My men are ready." Storm brought the Black Hawk down to 200 feet as they approached the mining complex. Rusted equipment, collapsed shafts, and weathered wooden buildings sprawled across a hillside. "No obvious signs of recent activity," Stevens observed through binoculars. Storm circled once, then again, studying every angle. "There, southeast corner building, doors ajar, and that window has been recently cleared of dust." Stevens focused his binoculars. "Good eye, Major. See." "Let's land behind that ridge, approach on foot," Storm decided. "Less threatening if it's Sanchez, better tactical advantage if it's not." They touched down in a small valley half a mile from the complex. Dust swirled as the rotor slowed. "Johnson, you and 2 men with me," Storm ordered, checking her sidearm. Stevens and the others remained with the aircraft, ready for immediate extraction if necessary. The trek to the mining complex was arduous, even in morning hours. The sun beating down with intimidating intensity. Storm moved with the Special Forces team, impressed by their silent efficiency as they approached from multiple angles. Johnson signaled, pointing out fresh footprints in the dust, small prints alongside larger ones. Children's tracks. Storm felt hope tempered by caution. The team converged on the building Storm had identified. Johnson moved to the door, Storm behind him, weapon ready but not raised, a deliberate choice to appear less threatening if Sanchez was inside. "United States military," Johnson announced. "We're here to help." Silence answered them. Johnson entered carefully, sweeping the interior before signaling the all clear. The building told its own story. A recently used fireplace, food wrappers, water bottles, and, most tellingly, a small stuffed animal forgotten in one corner. "Looks like we just missed them," Johnson concluded, examining cold ashes. "Within the last few hours." Storm picked up the stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear missing one eye, the kind of comfort object a child would never willingly leave behind unless forced to flee quickly. "They left in a hurry," she said, tucking the bear into her pack. "Something spooked them." Stevens's urgent voice crackled over the radio. "Major, we've got company. 2 vehicles approaching from the north. Armed men, moving with purpose." Through the dirty window, Storm spotted 2 pickup trucks bouncing along the rough track leading to the complex. Dust plumes marking their rapid approach. "Cartel search team," she concluded. "Sanchez must have spotted them coming and evacuated." "Stevens, Start engines, but hold position. Options? She asked Johnson. The veteran Special Forces operator assessed the situation quickly. Engage and neutralize or hide, observe, and potentially follow them when they leave. Storm considered these choices, weighing operational security against the urgent need to find Sanchez. We observe. They might reveal something useful. They descended into a storage cellar beneath the building as the vehicles approached. Through gaps in the wooden floor, they watched 8 armed men spread out to search. Their movements were disciplined, their weapons modern, not common criminals, but trained fighters. The men spoke rapid Spanish. Johnson listened intently, his expression growing increasingly concerned. They know Sanchez was here, he whispered. Found tracks leading south. One mentioned a ranch about 20 miles from here. Says it would be the next logical place for someone with children to seek help. The search continued for nearly 30 minutes before the cartel men returned to their vehicles. They're splitting up, Johnson reported as engines started outside. One team heading toward the mountains, the other toward the ranch. We need to get to that ranch first, Storm decided. If Sanchez is heading there, we need to intercept him before the cartel does. Minutes later, the Black Hawk was airborne again, Storm pushing its engines to maximum safe speed. Sergeant Park, she called over the secure channel. We need satellite imagery of the Hartman Ranch, approximately 20 miles south of our position. Cartel search teams are converging there. Satellite repositioning in progress, Park replied. We'll have imagery in approximately 8 minutes. The helicopter vibrated with the strain of maximum speed, skimming over the desert terrain. Stevens monitored their systems, occasionally glancing at Storm with growing respect. You handle this bird like you were born to it, he commented during a moment of relative quiet. My father always said good pilots can fly anything with wings or rotors, Storm replied, her thoughts momentarily turning to Robert Reynolds. Would he be proud of her decisive action now, or would he only see the insubordination that had created the situation? Park's voice came through clearly despite the helicopter's noise. Satellite imagery acquired, transmitting to your tactical display now. Be advised, we're detecting thermal signatures at the ranch, multiple human forms, at least one vehicle with a hot engine. The images appeared on the cockpit display. Buildings surrounding a central courtyard, a windmill, corrals, and outbuildings. The thermal overlay showed at least 6 human signatures, concentrated in what appeared to be the main house. Can you determine if any of those signatures match children's profiles? Storm asked. Negative. Resolution isn't sufficient for that level of detail. Storm processed this information. We need more intel before we commit. Take us to that ridgeline 2 miles east of the ranch. The ridge offered an excellent vantage point with clear sightlines to the ranch, while providing concealment for the helicopter. The team deployed sophisticated observation equipment, including thermal scopes and directional microphones. Through high-powered binoculars, Storm studied the ranch. A pickup truck was parked near the main house. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the desert heat. Movement at the south window, Johnson reported quietly. Adult male with a rifle, watching the approach road. One of Johnson's men approached. Directional mic is picking up voices. Spanish mostly, but some English. One adult male, one adult female, and children's voices in the background. Let me listen, Storm requested. Through the sophisticated equipment, distant voices became clear. A man's voice. Cannot stay long. They will have teams searching every property within 50 miles. A woman's response, older, her accent suggesting local origins. Miguel, those children need rest, food. The little one has blisters on her feet already. I know, Tia, but staying here puts you in danger too. The Cortez family does not forgive those who help traitors. Storm removed the headphones. It's Sanchez. He called her Tia, aunt. He's found shelter with a relative. Which means the cartel will check this place sooner rather than later, Johnson concluded. Family connections are the first thing they'll investigate. As if confirming his assessment, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, vehicles approaching rapidly along the access road. 3 vehicles, Johnson reported, watching through his scope. Pickup trucks, armed men in the beds, cartel search team, and a large one. Storm made her decision. We need to extract Sanchez now. Stevens, bring the helicopter up. Johnson, establish a defensive perimeter. I'll make contact with Sanchez. The Black Hawk descended into the ranch's courtyard as Storm saw figures moving inside the house, the muzzle of a rifle appearing briefly at a window, then withdrawing. Johnson and his team deployed rapidly while Storm approached the house alone, hands visible, sidearm holstered. Miguel Sanchez, she called out. Major Catherine Reynolds, United States Air Force. We're here to extract you and your children to safety. Silence answered her. The cartel vehicles were now visible on the road, perhaps 2 minutes away. Mr. Sanchez, I was the pilot who created the diversion last night when you and your children were surrounded. Colonel David Harrison sent me with verification. The front door opened slightly, just enough for the muzzle of a rifle to emerge. Show me, a man's voice demanded. Storm reached slowly into her flight suit, removing Harrison's sealed envelope. Authentication code enclosed. Seconds stretched into eternity as she stood exposed, aware of the approaching threat. Finally, the door opened fully. Miguel Sanchez stood in the doorway, rifle lowered but not set aside. He was younger than Storm had expected, perhaps mid-30s with weathered features. Behind him, 3 children peered out fearfully, 2 boys around 10 and 8, and a girl no more than 6. Harrison sent you? Sanchez's voice carried wariness born of years in deception. Yes, we have a helicopter ready. Cartel search teams are less than 2 minutes out. Sanchez glanced toward the road, then back at Storm. Decision crystallized in his eyes. Children, grab your backpacks, now! He turned toward the interior. Tia Elena, you must come with us. An elderly woman appeared, shaking her head firmly. This is my home, Miguel. I will not run. There's no time to argue, Storm interrupted, hearing approaching engines. Mr. Sanchez, get your children to the helicopter now. The elderly woman nodded with quiet dignity. Go, Miguel. Keep those children safe. She turned to Storm. Thank you for coming for them, Major. Sanchez herded his children toward the helicopter as the first cartel vehicle turned onto the ranch's access road. Johnson, begin withdrawal, Storm ordered. Cartel team entering the property now. The Special Forces team began a disciplined retreat, maintaining defensive formation. Sanchez lifted his youngest child into the aircraft, then the others, climbing aboard himself as the first shots rang out. Taking fire, Johnson reported calmly, his team returning suppressive fire. Storm ran to the helicopter, jumping into the co-pilot's seat as Stevens lifted the aircraft. Through the windscreen, she saw cartel vehicles skidding to stops, men pouring out with weapons raised. Go, 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 she urged. The Black Hawk rose rapidly, banking hard as bullets pinged harmlessly off its armored underside. In seconds, they were beyond effective small arms range. Sanchez sat with his arms around his children, his expression a complex mixture of relief, fear, and exhaustion. The youngest child cried softly against his chest. We're clear, Stevens reported. ETA to Fort Huachuca, approximately 40 minutes. Storm moved into the cabin and approached Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez, I'm Major Reynolds. Your children are safe now. The man studied her intently. You're the pilot from last night, the one who created the sonic boom that scattered Valdez's men. Yes, a ghost of a smile touched his features. Thank you. They would have killed us all if you hadn't intervened. Before Storm could respond, Stevens's voice came over the intercom. Major, incoming transmission from Fort Huachuca, coded urgent. Storm returned to the cockpit. Extraction 1, go ahead. Colonel Harrison's voice came through, tense and formal. Major Reynolds, we have a situation. New intelligence suggests a security compromise. Divert to fallback location Alpha immediately. Storm exchanged a concerned glance with Stevens. Fallback Alpha was an isolated border patrol station, a contingency location established during mission planning. Copy, Colonel. Diverting to Alpha. Is the nature of the compromise confirmed? Negative. Intelligence still developing. Lieutenant General Reynolds has taken command of the response team here. Her father had assumed operational control. That detail spoke volumes about the seriousness of whatever was happening. Understood, sir. ETA to Alpha approximately 25 minutes. Storm adjusted their course, banking the helicopter westward. Johnson, we're diverting to fallback location Alpha. Possible security compromise at main base. The Border Patrol station appeared on the horizon. A cluster of utilitarian buildings surrounded by a security fence, nestled in an isolated valley. As they approached, Storm noted the minimal activity. 2 patrol vehicles in the parking area, a single officer visible in the watchtower. Looks quiet, Stevens observed as they began their descent. Maybe too quiet. Storm shared his concern. Johnson, secure the landing zone before we disembark. The helicopter settled onto the dusty ground, rotors continuing their rhythmic beat, as Johnson and 2 of his men deployed to establish a security perimeter. A Border Patrol officer emerged, hands visible, walking calmly to meet them. After a brief exchange, Johnson gave the all-clear signal. Looks legitimate, Storm concluded, powering down the aircraft. The Border Patrol officer approached. Major Reynolds, I'm Supervisor Ramirez. We received word to expect you about 10 minutes ago. The facility is secure. Inside, the station's medical room was small but well equipped. The doctor examined each child carefully while Sanchez watched protectively. Minor dehydration, exhaustion, and the little one has some nasty blisters, the doctor reported. Nothing serious, but they need rest, fluids, and proper meals. Storm stepped into the hallway to contact Fort Huachuca. The connection established, she waited for Colonel Harrison to respond. Harrison here. Go ahead, Major. Sir, we've arrived at Alpha with Sanchez and his children. What's the situation at your location? We've identified a security breach in our communication system. Intelligence indicates cartel-affiliated hackers may have accessed mission details within the last 12 hours. How extensive was the breach? Unclear. We're operating under the assumption that all mission parameters have been compromised, including fallback locations. Should we initiate secondary displacement? Hold position for now. We're sending reinforcements, a Marine security detail, ETA approximately 90 minutes. Lieutenant General Reynolds will arrive with them to personally oversee the final extraction. The mention of her father brought mixed emotions. Understood, sir. One more thing, Major. Sanchez has critical intelligence beyond what we initially understood. His protection is now classified as a matter of national security. Storm returned to the medical room, finding Sanchez alone, his children having been taken to a rest area. Mr. Sanchez, reinforcements are en route, including senior military leadership. Sanchez looked up from where he sat, allowing the doctor to clean and bandage cuts on his arm. Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds, he said. Your father, I assume, given your name. Storm didn't bother hiding her surprise. You know my father? Not personally, but I made it my business to know key military figures involved in counter-narcotics operations. The general has been particularly effective in disrupting cartel supply lines. This was a side of her father's work Storm hadn't been directly exposed to. The general will be arriving with a Marine security detail in approximately 90 minutes, she informed him. In the meantime, I suggest you rest. Sanchez's expression suggested he didn't entirely share her confidence. Major, in my 3 years undercover with the Cortez organization, I learned one absolute truth. Nowhere is truly safe when they want you dead. As if confirming his words, Stevens appeared at the doorway. Major, we've got incoming aircraft on radar. Helicopter, approaching from the southeast. Storm checked her watch, too early for her father's detail. Identification? Negative, no transponder signal. Defensive positions, alert Johnson. Mr. Sanchez, stay with your children in the secure room. Stevens, get the Blackhawk ready for potential emergency extraction. The Border Patrol station transformed rapidly, from secure rest point to defensive position. Storm joined Supervisor Ramirez in the communications center, monitoring the approaching aircraft. Still no response to identification requests, Ramirez reported. They're 5 minutes out and maintaining direct approach vector. The lack of identification combined with the direct approach raised serious concerns. After the security breach, they couldn't take chances. Supervisor, initiate lockdown protocols. Johnson and his team will maintain perimeter security. As Ramirez implemented these orders, Storm contacted Stevens. Status? Ready for immediate departure, Major. The approaching helicopter appeared on the horizon, a dark speck against the afternoon sky. Through binoculars, Storm identified it as a military UH-60, similar to their own, but with no visible markings. Incoming aircraft, this is Border Patrol Station Alpha, Ramirez broadcast. Identify yourself immediately or you will be treated as hostile. The radio crackled, and a familiar voice responded. Colonel Harrison. Station Alpha, this is Colonel David Harrison. Authorization code Echo November 639. Stand down alert status. Relief washed through the command center. Ramirez looked to Storm for confirmation. That's Harrison, she confirmed, but maintain security protocols until visual verification is complete. The helicopter descended toward the landing zone, dust swirling beneath its rotors. As it touched down, Storm saw Harrison in the co-pilot's seat, and beside him, her father, Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Security team, maintain positions, Storm ordered. I'll make personal contact for verification. She walked out to the landing zone alone, standing tall as the rotors slowed and passengers disembarked. Colonel Harrison emerged first, followed by her father. Behind them came 4 Marines in full combat gear. Major Reynolds, Harrison called, approaching with a crisp salute that Storm returned. Situation report. Facility secure, sir. Sanchez and his children are inside. Medical assessment complete. Harrison nodded approval. then stepped aside as Robert Reynolds approached. Her father looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, imposing, his silver hair cropped in the same military cut he'd worn for decades. Catherine. He didn't use her rank or call sign, the only acknowledgement that this was not a standard military encounter between officers. General. Storm maintained her professional demeanor despite the complicated emotions his presence evoked. Welcome to Alpha Station. His eyes, so similar to her own, studied her face briefly before he turned to survey the facility. Colonel Harrison has briefed me. I'll need to speak with Sanchez immediately. The businesslike approach was typical of her father. Mission first, personal matters later, if at all. Yes, sir. He's in the secure area with his children. This way. As they walked toward the main building, Robert matched his stride to hers. The extraction team performed well under challenging circumstances, he said, his voice modulated for her ears alone. Your decision to divert here was sound. From her father, this qualified as effusive praise. Storm acknowledged it with a nod. Thank you, sir. Inside, they found Sanchez sitting with his children in the break room. The children were eating sandwiches, their faces cleaner now, though fatigue still marked their features. Sanchez rose as the officers entered, his posture straightening automatically in the presence of a 3-star general. Lieutenant General Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. Miguel Sanchez, DEA. Mr. Sanchez. Robert shook his hand firmly. Your service to this country has been extraordinary. I understand the personal cost has been significant. Sanchez glanced at his children. They're safe now. That's what matters. Indeed. Robert's expression softened slightly as he looked at the children, a rare display of the humanity he typically kept hidden behind military formality. They will remain safe, you have my word. Catherine, Robert turned to Storm. A word, please. They stepped into an adjacent room, a small office with maps covering the walls. Her father closed the door, his demeanor shifting subtly as official ranks temporarily receded. You look tired, he said, surprising her with the personal observation. It's been an intense 24-hour, Storm admitted. Robert nodded, studying her face. Colonel Harrison has kept me informed of your actions. The extraction was executed efficiently despite the complications. Again, the professional assessment rather than personal connection. Storm accepted it as the closest her father could come to expressing approval. What's the situation at Fort Huachuca? She asked. Moving to safer operational ground. Contained, but concerning. We've identified multiple access points in our secure communications systems. The breach appears to have been ongoing for some time. Cartel-affiliated hackers, as Harrison mentioned? Not just hackers. Robert's expression darkened. We have evidence suggesting inside assistance, someone with high-level access facilitating the breaches. The implication was clear. A mole. Yes, which is why we're implementing extraordinary security measures for Sanchez. His intelligence may help us identify not just cartel assets in law enforcement and judiciary, but potentially within military and intelligence services as well. This explained her father's personal involvement. Robert Reynolds had always been a true believer in the integrity of the institutions he served. What's my role going forward? Storm asked. You'll accompany Sanchez to Yuma. You've established rapport with him and his children, which will be valuable during the transition to protective custody. Storm nodded, though she sensed there was more her father wasn't saying. And after that? Robert hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. Catherine, what Sanchez knows goes deeper than we initially understood. The cartel's infiltration appears to reach into areas that could compromise national security beyond drug enforcement. He mentioned assets in positions of power. Yes, and some of the names on his list. They're people I've worked with, trusted colleagues. For a brief moment, her father's formidable composure wavered. This could shake the foundations of multiple institutions. Storm rarely saw her father vulnerable. The glimpse behind his professional armor reminded her that despite their differences, Robert Reynolds was still human. Their planning was interrupted by a sudden commotion, raised voices, rapid footsteps. Storm moved instantly to the door, opening it to find Colonel Harrison approaching with urgent purpose. General, Major, he addressed them both. We have a situation. Border Patrol radar has detected multiple aircraft approaching from the south. At least 3 helicopters, flying in formation, no transponders. Robert moved immediately to the command center, Storm and Harrison following. The radar display confirmed Harrison's report. 3 aircraft approaching rapidly from Mexican airspace, their flight pattern suggesting coordinated action. "Time to intercept," Robert demanded. 12 minutes at current speed, the radar operator reported. "They're pushing their engines hard, sir." Storm exchanged a glance with Harrison. "Cartel air assets. They must have identified our location through the security breach." "Agreed." Robert's decision was immediate. "Initiate emergency evacuation. Sanchez and his family on the first helicopter, with Major Reynolds and a Marine security team. Colonel Harrison, you'll coordinate ground defense here to cover their departure." The Border Patrol station erupted into disciplined activity. Storm moved quickly to the secure area, finding Sanchez already gathering his children, his expression grim but composed. "We're moving now," she informed him. "Hostile aircraft approaching." Sanchez nodded, unsurprised. The cartel has Russian-trained pilots and military surplus helicopters, machine guns, possibly rocket pods. These aren't amateurs, Major. Outside, Stevens had the Black Hawk spooled up and ready. The 4 Marines from her father's detail formed a protective box around Sanchez and his children as they crossed the open ground to the helicopter. Robert approached Storm as she prepared to board. "Catherine, get them to Yuma. No detours, no alternate landing sites. Maximum speed, minimum altitude to avoid radar detection where possible." "Yes, sir." She recognized the concern beneath his official tone. "We'll make it." Something shifted in her father's expression, a softening almost imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him well. "I know you will. You're the best pilot for this mission." The unexpected acknowledgement caught Storm off guard. Before she could respond, Robert continued, his voice quieter now. "Your mother would be proud of what you did for those children yesterday. Breaking protocol to save innocent lives. That was Margaret through and through." The mention of her mother, delivered without criticism but with something approaching understanding, struck Storm deeply. She searched her father's face, finding an openness there she hadn't seen in years. "Thank you," she managed, emotions threatening her professional composure. Robert stepped back, resuming his command presence. "Go. We'll hold them here as long as necessary." Storm boarded the helicopter, taking the pilot's seat as Stevens completed final checks. Through the windscreen, she saw her father return to the command center, his tall figure radiating authority and purpose. "All secure," the Marine team leader reported from the cabin. "Subject secured, ready for departure." "Copy that." Storm lifted the Black Hawk smoothly into the desert sky. "Yuma approach, this is Extraction 1, emergency inbound with high-value package. Request priority clearance and security detail upon arrival." As they gained altitude, Storm looked back at the Border Patrol station receding below them. Her father had chosen to remain behind with limited forces to cover their escape, placing himself deliberately in harm's way to ensure Sanchez's safe extraction. The realization settled like a weight in her chest. Despite their differences, despite the years of emotional distance, Robert Reynolds was still the man who had taught her about duty and sacrifice. In his own way, he was demonstrating those values now, just as she had when breaking protocol to save Sanchez's children. "Multiple aircraft approaching from R6, Stevens reported, closing fast." Storm pushed the helicopter to maximum speed, skimming low over the desert terrain. "Marine 1, we have pursuit. Prepare defensive positions." In the cabin behind her, the Marines shifted to cover the rear approaches, weapons ready. Sanchez held his children close, speaking softly to them in Spanish. The approaching aircraft appeared on the horizon behind them, 3 helicopters in tight formation, closing the distance despite the Black Hawk's head start. "They're gaining," Stevens observed, tension evident in his voice. 4 minutes to intercept at current speeds." Storm studied the terrain ahead, making rapid calculations. "There's a canyon system 2 miles ahead. We can use it for cover." That's some tight flying, Major. Better than being shot down in open terrain." The canyon mouth appeared ahead, a narrow opening between towering rock walls that would require precise flying to navigate. Storm reduced altitude further, aligning the Black Hawk perfectly with the natural corridor. "Pursuit aircraft still closing," Stevens reported. "Lead helicopter now in weapons range." As if confirming his assessment, the first rounds pinged against the Black Hawk's armored tail section. Storm ignored the impacts, focusing entirely on the canyon entrance now filling their windscreen. "Hold on," she warned, then banked the helicopter sharply into the narrow space between the rock walls. The transition from open desert to confined canyon was jarring. Suddenly, the aircraft was threading between vertical stone surfaces that seemed close enough to touch from either side of the cockpit. Storm flew by instinct and training, making split-second adjustments to avoid outcroppings. Behind them, the lead pursuit helicopter hesitated briefly before following them into the canyon. The other two remained above, likely intending to track them from the rim. "They're splitting up," Stevens confirmed. "One in pursuit through the canyon, two tracking from above." Storm had expected this tactic. "Good. The one behind us has the same limitations we do in here. The two above can't engage effectively through the canyon walls." The pursuit became a test of pilot skill, with Storm using every feature of the canyon system to her advantage. She weaved the Black Hawk through narrow passages, used rock formations for momentary concealment, and executed tight turns that forced the pursuing aircraft to slow or risk collision. "You fly this thing like a fighter jet," Stevens commented, admiration evident despite the tension. "Different aircraft, same principles," Storm replied, her focus absolute. "Know your capabilities, know your environment, make them work together." The pursuing helicopter was falling behind now, its pilot either less skilled or more cautious in the challenging terrain. Storm pressed the advantage, pushing deeper into the canyon network. "We're opening the gap," Stevens reported. "Pursuit helicopter now 15 seconds behind and losing ground." Storm now faced the next challenge, finding an exit from the canyon system that wouldn't leave them exposed to the waiting aircraft above. There, she identified a side passage that angled upward toward a narrow gap in the canyon rim. "That exit will put us in the foothills. We can use the terrain masking all the way to Yuma from there." The maneuver would be challenging, a climbing turn through a restricted space, requiring perfect timing and control. "Pursuit helicopter is breaking off," Stevens announced suddenly. "They're turning back." Storm checked the rear cameras, confirming that the cartel aircraft was indeed reversing course. "They're giving up the chase?" "Negative." Stevens' voice tightened. "They're gaining altitude to rejoin the others. Looks like they're setting up to intercept us when we exit the canyon." The tactical situation was clear. The cartel pilots had recognized Storm's superior skill in the confined canyon and opted for a different approach. They would wait for the Black Hawk to emerge into open airspace, where their numerical advantage would be decisive. "We need to create an unexpected exit," she decided. "Stevens, check the map. Is there another way out of this system that wouldn't be an obvious choice?" Stevens studied the digital terrain map. "There's a narrow gap about 3 miles ahead, but it's tight, barely wider than our rotor diameter." "Perfect. They'll be watching the main exits to the west and south. We'll use this gap, then circle back toward Yuma once we're clear." The gap appeared ahead, a slender crack in the canyon wall that seemed impossibly narrow for an aircraft. Storm reduced speed slightly, aligning the helicopter perfectly with the opening. "This is going to be close," Stevens warned, eyeing the gap with professional concern. "We'll fit. Just." Storm's confidence was absolute as she guided the Black Hawk toward the narrow passage. Sometimes the most dangerous path is the safest option. The helicopter slipped through the gap with mere feet of clearance on either side, rotors seeming to nearly brush the stone walls. The box canyon beyond offered momentary shelter, a hidden pocket in the landscape invisible from above. Storm brought the aircraft to a hover, keeping it close to the canyon wall. "We'll hold here briefly, let them commit to their search pattern, then break for Yuma when they're focused elsewhere." For several tense minutes, they maintained position, the helicopter systems muted to minimize detectability. Storm monitored the tactical display, watching as the cartel aircraft circled the main canyon exits, their search pattern becoming increasingly desperate. "They're splitting up," she observed, expanding the search perimeter. "Now's our chance." With decisive movements, Storm brought the Black Hawk up and over the canyon rim, immediately dropping to contour-hugging altitude on the opposite side from the searching aircraft. The terrain here was broken and irregular, perfect for masking their approach to Yuma. "We're clear," Stevens confirmed. "No pursuit aircraft on our tail." In the cabin, Storm heard one of the children laugh, a sound of relief that penetrated even the helicopter's noise. The sound reminded her why this mission mattered, why the risks were worth taking. "Yuma approach, this is Extraction 1, she broadcast. "Package secure, inbound from the northeast. Request security team standing by." The response was immediate. "Extraction 1, Yuma approach. Security teams deployed, runway cleared for your arrival. Be advised, Lieutenant General Reynolds has ordered full base lockdown upon your arrival." The mention of her father brought Storm's thoughts back to the Border Patrol station. "Yuma approach, any update on situation at Alpha Station?" "Negative, Extraction 1. Communications with Alpha Station were lost approximately 7 minutes ago. Status unknown." The information sent a cold wave through Storm's body. Communications lost could mean many things: equipment failure, tactical necessity, or something far worse. "Copy, Yuma," she acknowledged, keeping her voice professionally neutral despite the concern rising within her. "Continuing approach ETA 19 minutes. A." Stevens glanced at her, reading her expression. "Your father is one of the most capable officers in the military. If anyone can handle that situation, he can." Storm nodded, grateful for the attempt at reassurance. "I know, but capability doesn't make you bulletproof." The remainder of the flight proceeded without incident, the sprawling complex of Marine Corps Air Station Yuma appearing on the horizon. Storm could see the heightened security, armed Marines at perimeter positions, additional aircraft on standby alert. She brought the Black Hawk in for a perfect landing. As the rotors wound down, the Marines from their transport moved into formation around Sanchez and his children, creating a protective corridor to the waiting vehicles. A Marine colonel approached as Storm descended from the aircraft. "Major Reynolds, Colonel Thomas Bradford, Base Security Commander. The package has been secured and is en route to the protected facility." "Any word from Alpha Station?" Storm asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Bradford's expression confirmed her fears. "Limited information. We have satellite confirmation of multiple cartel aircraft at the location. Ground forces appear to have overrun the facility approximately 15 minutes ago." Storm maintained her composure with effort. "Casualties? Unknown. We have a quick reaction force preparing for deployment now, but there's still 20 minutes from launch. 20 minutes to launch, then flight time to the station. It would be at least an hour before American forces could respond effectively." "I need to join that QRF," Storm stated, her decision immediate and absolute. Bradford shook his head. "I'm sorry, Major. I have explicit orders from Pentagon Command. You're to remain at Yuma and assist with debriefing Sanchez." "Colonel, my father and Colonel Harrison are at that station." "I understand, but my orders are clear." Bradford's tone softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant General Reynolds' final transmission before communications were lost included specific instructions that you were to remain with Sanchez regardless of developments at Alpha Station. Her father's final order had been to protect her from returning to danger." The realization hit Storm with unexpected emotional force. Robert Reynolds, despite his apparent coldness, his constant criticism, had used his final confirmed communication to ensure his daughter's safety. "I understand, Colonel," she managed, professionalism reasserting itself over personal concerns. "Please keep me informed of any developments." "Of course, Major. Sanchez has requested your presence during his initial debriefing. He seems to trust you." Storm followed Bradford toward the secure buildings, her thoughts divided between the mission ahead and those left behind. Whatever had happened at Alpha Station, she had a duty to complete this mission, to ensure Sanchez's intelligence reached those who could act on it. As she entered the secure facility, Storm caught sight of Sanchez and his children being escorted into a comfortable suite. Sanchez looked back, making eye contact with Storm and nodding slightly, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. In that moment, despite the uncertainty surrounding her father's fate, Storm found a measure of clarity. This mission had begun with her defying orders to save children in danger. It had evolved into something more complex, more consequential. Yet at its core, it remained about protecting the vulnerable, whether children caught in cartel violence or American institutions threatened by corruption. The desert sun was setting, painting the military base in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere to the southeast, her father might be fighting for his life. The daughter in her ached to return, to join the rescue mission. The officer understood that completing the mission he had entrusted to her was the greater service. Robert Reynolds had taught her about duty from her earliest memories. Now, as uncertainty surrounded his fate, Storm would honor those lessons by seeing this mission through to its conclusion. That was the true meaning of service, continuing the mission even when personal cost was highest. It was what her father would expect of her. It was what she expected of herself. Storm squared her shoulders and followed Bradford into the debriefing room, ready to complete the mission her father had entrusted to her, whatever the cost. The debriefing room at Marine Corps Air Station Yuma gleamed with military efficiency. Maps of the border region covered one wall, surveillance feeds another. Storm sat across from Miguel Sanchez, watching as the former undercover agent methodically built a network diagram on the digital display between them. "These are the primary cartel assets within U.S. institutions," Sanchez explained, his voice steady despite 36 hours without real sleep. Judges, border officials, police chiefs, prosecutors. Each name he added sent ripples of shock through the assembled officials. 3 FBI agents, 2 Justice Department prosecutors, and Colonel Bradford listened with grim expressions as Sanchez meticulously documented the corruption web he discovered during his 3 years embedded with the Cortez organization. "This can't leave this room until we're ready to move," Bradford emphasized. "If these individuals learn we're onto them, evidence will disappear, witnesses will vanish." Storm studied the diagram, noting the strategic positioning of the compromised officials. Not random corruption, but a carefully constructed shield protecting cartel operations across multiple states. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the Border Patrol station, to her father and Colonel Harrison. No updates had arrived in the 3 hours since communications were lost. A soft knock interrupted the briefing. A Marine lieutenant entered, approaching Storm with a sealed message. "Major Reynolds, urgent communication from Pentagon Command." Storm opened the message, her training keeping her expression neutral despite the contents. "Colonel, may I be excused for a moment?" Bradford nodded, and Storm stepped into the adjacent communications room. Alone, she reread the message, confirming what she'd already absorbed. The quick reaction force had reached Alpha Station 20 minutes ago. The facility had been destroyed, evidence of a significant firefight. Multiple casualties confirmed. Her father and Colonel Harrison were not among those found. The clinical military language couldn't mask the implications. Either they had been taken by the cartel forces, or their bodies hadn't yet been located in the rubble. Neither scenario offered much hope. Storm placed both palms flat on the communications console, steadying herself, allowing 5 seconds of personal reaction before compartmentalizing the emotions. If her father had been captured, every minute mattered. If he was dead, the mission he'd entrusted to her remained. The door opened behind her. Sanchez stood there, his eyes reflecting understanding beyond his years. "Bad news," he said, "not a question." "The Border Patrol station was overrun. My father and Colonel Harrison are missing." Sanchez nodded once, processing the information. The Cortez family wouldn't kill a 3-star general immediately. They'd recognize his value. The statement was both horrifying and hopeful. Storm turned to face him fully. "You know how they operate. What would they do?" "They'd take him somewhere secure for interrogation." Sanchez's tone was matter-of-fact, a survival skill developed during years among killers, probably across the border where U.S. forces can't easily reach. How long would they keep him alive? Sanchez considered carefully. Lieutenant General Reynolds is a significant prize. They'd extract whatever intelligence they could, then use him as leverage. 24 to 48 hours if he's uncooperative. And Robert Reynolds would be uncooperative to his last breath. Storm knew this with absolute certainty. "I need to join the search efforts," she said, already calculating flight times and operational parameters. "You can't." Sanchez's voice remained gentle but firm. "Your father's last order was for you to ensure my family's safety and my testimony. And when that mission is complete?" A ghost of a smile touched Sanchez's weathered features. "I'm scheduled to begin formal deposition with the Justice Department in 3 hours. By morning, I'll be in the witness protection pipeline. Your official assignment ends then." Storm studied him, recognizing the calculation behind his words. "You're giving me a timeline." "I'm stating facts, Major. What you do with them is your decision." Sanchez held her gaze. "But know this. If you go after your father without proper backup and planning, you'll likely end up captured or killed. And he taught you better than that." The rebuke was gentle but effective. Robert Reynolds had indeed taught her better. Taught her that emotion without strategy was merely surrender to impulse. "I understand," Storm acknowledged. "Let's complete your deposition. Then I'll make my next move." They returned to the briefing room. Storm's focus sharpened rather than dulled by the news. For the next 3 hours, she immersed herself in the details of Sanchez's testimony, mentally cataloging cartel operational patterns, locations, and tactics that might help locate her father. As dawn approached, the formal deposition process concluded. Sanchez and his children were escorted to a secure transport that would take them to the first stage of witness protection. Before departing, he paused beside Storm. "Major Reynolds," he said formally, then switched to a more personal tone. "Catherine, thank you for saving my children. Whatever happens next, know that you've already won the most important battle." Storm nodded, understanding the depth behind his words. Take care of them, Miguel. Give them the childhood they deserve. I will. He hesitated, then added, the Cortez family has a compound in the Sierra Madre Mountains, just across the border. Very secluded, heavily defended. If they have high-value prisoners, that's where they take them. The information wasn't in his official testimony. It was a personal gift, soldier to soldier. Thank you. As Sanchez and his children departed under heavy guard, Storm moved immediately to the base operations center. Her official assignment complete, she now had a narrow window to launch her own mission before being reassigned or ordered to stand down. The operations center hummed with activity even at this early hour. Storm located the search and rescue coordinator, a veteran Air Force major named Peterson. Major Peterson, I need an update on the search for Lieutenant General Reynolds and Colonel Harrison. Peterson's expression suggested he'd been expecting her. Satellite surveillance identified 3 helicopters crossing into Mexican airspace after the attack on Alpha Station. We've tracked them to a region in the Sierra Madre Mountains, but we lost visual when they descended below the tree line. Any communication with Mexican authorities? Ongoing, but complicated. That region is essentially cartel-controlled territory. Mexican military forces avoid it without overwhelming numbers. Storm studied the tactical display. What assets do we have available for cross-border operations? How things? Peterson hesitated. Major Reynolds, I should inform you that you've been officially removed from this operation due to personal connection to the missing personnel. Storm had expected this standard protocol. I understand, but as someone familiar with both the region and the cartel's tactics from Sanchez's briefings, I'd like to offer my assessment. The careful phrasing gave Peterson room to share information without technically violating orders. He nodded slightly, appreciating the professional approach. We have 2 reconnaissance drones maintaining surveillance of the region. A special operations team is on standby at Davis Monthan, awaiting diplomatic clearance for potential cross-border action. Timeline for clearance? Unknown. It's moving up the chain at State Department, but these things take time. Time her father might not have. Storm studied the satellite imagery, focusing on a particular mountain ridge. The Cortez family has a compound here. She indicated the location. Heavily defended, but secluded enough for high-value detentions. Peterson looked impressed. That matches our assessment from thermal imaging. Significant activity at that location in the last 6 hours. Have the drones detected any vehicle movement in or out? Minimal. 1 supply truck arrived about 2 hours ago. The compound appears to be in lockdown. Storm absorbed this information, formulating a plan. Thank you, Major. I appreciate the update. As she turned to leave, Peterson spoke quietly. The general is one of the most respected officers in the service, Major. Everyone here wants to see him recovered safely. The sentiment was genuine, but Storm knew the reality of cross-border operations. By the time diplomatic clearance came through, it might be too late. Her father's life now measured in hours, not days. In her temporary quarters, Storm changed into standard flight gear, then accessed the secure terminal. Using her command codes, she pulled detailed satellite imagery of the Sierra Madre region, focusing on the compound Sanchez had identified. She studied approach vectors, defensive positions, and potential landing zones, committing them to memory. A soft knock at her door interrupted her planning. Captain Stevens stood outside, his expression serious but determined. I heard about your father, he said without preamble. I also heard you've been removed from the search operation. Storm met his gaze evenly. That's correct, correct. Stevens glanced past her at the satellite imagery. Looks like you're planning something unauthorized. I'm reviewing intelligence relevant to ongoing operations. A slight smile crossed Stevens's face. Of course, Major. He stepped inside, closing the door. You should know that the Black Hawk we used yesterday has been scheduled for a maintenance test flight at 0600. Standard procedure after the kind of stress we put it through. Storm checked her watch. 600 was 30 minutes away. Who's conducting the test flight? The duty roster says I am, with a co-pilot of my choosing. Stevens's expression remained professional, but his meaning was clear. The flight plan includes a sweep along the southern training range, which happens to extend quite close to the border. Storm understood immediately. And if that aircraft experienced navigational issues that briefly took it across the border, mechanical failures happen, especially after aircraft have been pushed to their limits. Stevens shrugged. By the time anyone realized we were off course, we might have seen something worth reporting. It was a thin pretext, but it offered a window of opportunity. If they moved quickly, they could be over the compound before anyone realized their true intentions. Not enough time for a rescue operation, but perhaps enough for reconnaissance that could save critical hours when the official mission finally launched. That sounds like responsible aircraft maintenance, Storm said. I'd be happy to serve as your co-pilot, Captain. I thought you might. Stevens handed her a small package. Sergeant Johnson asked me to give you this. Said something about always being prepared for unexpected weather. Storm opened the package to find a compact tactical kit, emergency medical supplies, a survival knife, signaling equipment, and most notably, a 9mm sidearm with suppressor. Thoughtful of him to be concerned about the weather, Storm commented, securing the weapon under her flight jacket. Johnson takes meteorology very seriously. Stevens checked his watch. We should proceed to the flight line. Maintenance waits for no one. They walked through the base with purposeful strides, their manner suggesting nothing more than routine duties. At the flight line, the Black Hawk sat ready, its pre-flight checks already completed by ground crew, who had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Storm performed her own inspection, noting with approval that the aircraft had been fully refueled and its systems restored to optimal condition. As she climbed into the cockpit, she felt the familiar tension before a difficult mission. Not fear, but the heightened awareness that came with calculated risk. Stevens joined her, beginning the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. Yuma Tower, this is Maintenance 7 requesting clearance for test flight along Southern Range. Standard pattern. Maintenance 7, you are cleared for departure. Winds light and variable, ceiling unlimited. Storm watched the instruments as the engines spooled up, rotors beginning their rhythmic beat against the morning air. Part of her recognized the recklessness of this action, potentially sacrificing her career, possibly her freedom, on a mission with minimal chance of success. The rational officer in her calculated the odds and found them wanting. But another part, the part that had learned duty and sacrifice from Robert Reynolds himself, knew there was no choice. Her father would do the same for her, would already be in the air if their positions were reversed. Ready? Stevens asked quietly as the helicopter lifted from the tarmac. Ready, Storm confirmed, accepting whatever consequences might come. The Black Hawk rose smoothly into the dawn sky, banking south toward the training range as their flight plan specified. For 20 minutes, they followed the approved route, maintaining normal communications with Yuma Air Control. As they approached the southernmost point of the range, Stevens made the planned transition. Yuma Control Maintenance 7. We're experiencing some unusual vibration in the tail rotor. Going to extend the flight pattern to run some additional diagnostics. Copy Maintenance 7. Keep us advised of your status. The pretense established, Stevens increased speed, pushing deeper south while maintaining low altitude to minimize radar signature. Storm monitored their systems, ensuring their transponder continued broadcasting the expected codes while they diverted from the approved route. We'll have about 15 minutes before they start asking questions, Stevens noted, his focus on flying preserving their professional dialogue despite the unauthorized nature of their actions. Agreed. Once we're over the target, we'll need to make a rapid assessment and withdraw immediately. The desert landscape gave way to increasingly mountainous terrain as they crossed the invisible line marking the international border. Storm felt the subtle shift in her awareness. They were now in hostile territory, without authorization or backup. 10 minutes to target, Stevens reported, guiding the helicopter through a series of ridge lines that would help mask their approach from ground-based observation. Storm activated the specialized surveillance equipment they'd used during Sanchez's extraction, going passive on all systems. Emissions discipline from this point forward. The mountains rose around them, ancient stone sentinels indifferent to the human drama unfolding in their shadows. Storm studied the terrain, matching it to the satellite imagery she'd memorized, identifying landmarks that would guide them to the compound. There, she pointed toward a secluded valley nestled between steep ridges. That's the approach vector. Stevens nodded, adjusting their course. I see it. We'll come in from the east, use that ridgeline for cover until the last moment. The Black Hawk skimmed over the forest canopy, its sound dampened by the natural acoustics of the mountain terrain. Storm's heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. This was what she'd been trained for, precision execution under extreme pressure. As they cleared the final ridge, the compound came into view. A sprawling estate surrounded by high walls, guard towers at each corner, multiple buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Even from this distance, Storm could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter, their movements suggesting professional military training rather than typical cartel enforcers. Defense setup is significant, Stevens observed, maintaining their position just below the ridgeline to avoid detection. Those are heavy machine gun emplacements on the towers. Storm activated the high-resolution optical system, scanning methodically through the compound. Multiple vehicles in the motor pool, at least 20 guards visible on the grounds. She focused on the central building, a Spanish-style hacienda that dominated the compound. That main structure likely contains any high-value detainees. We can't get any closer without risking detection, Stevens warned. Their air defense systems would pick us up. Storm continued her surveillance, searching for any sign of her father or Colonel Harrison. Then she saw it, a brief movement at an upper window of the main building. A figure held up what appeared to be a reflective surface, catching the morning sun in a pattern too regular to be accidental. There, Storm indicated the window. That's deliberate signaling, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS, Stevens confirmed. Classic distress call. Storm adjusted the optical system, increasing magnification to its maximum setting. For a brief moment, she caught a glimpse of the figure inside, tall, silver-haired military bearing even in captivity. It's him, she said, her voice remaining professional despite the surge of emotion. Upper floor, east side of the main building. Positive identification? Confirmed. And he's mobile, which means he's alive and at least somewhat functional. Stevens nodded, understanding the significance. We've confirmed presence and location. That's valuable intelligence for the extraction team. One more pass, Storm requested. I want to document the defensive positions and guard rotations. They circled the compound once more, maintaining their distance, while Storm recorded detailed observations of the security setup. She noted guard positions, patrol patterns, and, most importantly, potential weaknesses in the perimeter. Time to withdraw, Stevens finally said. We've been off approved flight path for 18 minutes. They'll be calling in status reports soon. Storm completed her final scan, committing key details to memory. Agreed, let's head back. As Stevens banked the helicopter away from the compound, Storm took one last look at the window where she'd seen her father. The knowledge that he was alive sent a wave of determination through her. The official extraction mission now had actionable intelligence that could save critical hours. They retraced their path across the border, maintaining communication silence until they crossed back into U.S. airspace. As they approached the training range, Stevens reestablished contact with Yuma Control. Yuma Control, this is Maintenance 7. We've completed our diagnostic runs. Vibration issue appears to have resolved itself, returning to base. Copy Maintenance 7. Be advised, Colonel Bradford has requested you contact base operations immediately upon your return. Stevens and Storm exchanged glances. Their unauthorized detour had been noticed. Acknowledged, Yuma Control. The remainder of the flight passed in focused silence, both pilots aware of the likely consequences awaiting them. As they approached the airfield, Storm could see military police vehicles positioned near their designated landing pad. Looks like our reception committee has arrived, Stevens observed dryly. I'll take full responsibility, Storm said. This was my initiative. Your career shouldn't suffer for it. Stevens shook his head. We made the decision together, Major. I knew exactly what I was doing. Storm appreciated his integrity, but recognized the disproportionate impact. You have a family, Captain. I don't. And you have a father, Stevens countered. Worth the risk. They touched down precisely on their assigned pad, powering down the aircraft with textbook procedure. As the rotor slowed, military police approached from both sides, accompanied by Colonel Bradford himself. Storm removed her helmet and exited the aircraft, standing at attention as Bradford approached. His expression was a controlled mask of professional displeasure. Major Reynolds, Captain Stevens, he addressed them formally. You are both relieved of duty pending investigation into unauthorized use of military aircraft and potential violation of international airspace. Yes, sir, Storm acknowledged, accepting the consequences without argument. Your sidearms, please. They surrendered their service weapons to the waiting MPs. You will be escorted to separate debriefing rooms for immediate questioning, Bradford continued. The nature of your actions may constitute serious violations of military code and international law. Storm maintained her professional composure, prepared for the worst. Her career was likely over, possibly her freedom as well, but she had confirmed her father was alive, had gathered intelligence that could save him. A fair exchange. Colonel, she said evenly. "We have time-sensitive intelligence regarding Lieutenant General Reynolds and Colonel Harrison that should be communicated immediately to the rescue planning team." Bradford's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm sure you do, Major. That will be addressed during your debriefing." As the MPs moved to escort them to separate vehicles, a commotion at the edge of the airfield drew their attention. A black SUV approached at high speed, bypassing normal security protocols. It screeched to a halt nearby, and a man in civilian attire emerged, flashing credentials that caused the MPs to immediately stand down. "Colonel Bradford," the newcomer called, approaching with purpose. "I'm Special Agent Williams, Joint Special Operations Command. These officers are now under JSOC authority by direct order of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs." Bradford accepted the written orders with visible surprise. "This is highly irregular, Agent Williams." "So is the situation, Colonel." Williams turned to Storm and Stevens. "Major Captain, I need you to come with me immediately. We have a very narrow window of opportunity, and I'm told you have intelligence critical to the mission." Confused but compliant, Storm and Stevens followed Williams to the waiting vehicle. Once inside, he explained the situation rapidly. 20 minutes ago, diplomatic clearance was granted for a cross-border extraction operation. Mexican government has authorized a limited-duration mission to rescue Lieutenant General Reynolds and Colonel Harrison, based on credible intelligence that they're being held by cartel forces. "That was fast," Stevens commented, skepticism evident in his tone. "The general has friends in high places," Williams replied, "and some very convincing evidence of cartel involvement in the attack on a U.S. military installation emerged during Sanchez's deposition." He focused on Storm. "I'm told you have first-hand intelligence on the compound where they're being held?" "Yes," Storm confirmed. "Fresh as of 30 minutes ago." Williams handed her a secure tablet. "I need everything: layout, defenses, guard positions, and most importantly, confirmation of the general's location within the compound." Storm immediately began transferring her observations to the digital schematics, marking guard posts, patrol routes, and defensive emplacements with precise detail. "The main building, upper floor, east side," she indicated the location. "My father was there, alive and mobile enough to signal with what appeared to be a reflective surface. Classic SOS pattern." Williams studied her annotations, nodding with approval. "This is exactly what we needed. The extraction team is spinning up now at Davis-Monthan. 4 helicopters, 16 operators, maximum stealth approach." "When do they launch?" Storm asked. 1 hour. They'll cross the border at dusk, using darkness for cover during extraction. Storm calculated the timeline in her head. "That's cutting it close. Cartel leadership could arrive at the compound any time. Once they begin serious interrogation." She didn't need to finish the thought. Williams understood the implications. "The team is moving as fast as possible. This intelligence will save them critical planning time." Storm made her decision, knowing it might be her last as a military officer. "I'm going with them." Williams began to object, but she continued before he could speak. "I've seen the compound layout firsthand. I know exactly where my father is being held. And most importantly, he'll recognize me immediately, which eliminates any confusion or hesitation during extraction." "Major, you're not special operations qualified. I'm combat experienced, familiar with rotary wing operations, and I've just completed a successful reconnaissance of the target." Storm held his gaze steadily. "And I speak fluent Spanish, which could prove vital if we encounter civilians or need to extract information quickly." Williams considered her points, his expression suggesting an internal debate. Finally, he nodded. "I'll have to clear it with the mission commander, but your arguments have merit." "What about me?" Stevens asked. "I've seen the compound too." "One of you needs to stay here to brief the planning team in detail," Williams replied. "Your first-hand observations are too valuable to risk both of you on the extraction." Stevens looked ready to protest, but Storm interjected. "He's right, Captain. The extraction team needs someone who can answer their questions directly during final planning." Though clearly disappointed, Stevens nodded his acceptance. "Understood, Major." The SUV arrived at a secure hangar on the far side of the base. Inside, a planning operation was already underway, with maps, satellite imagery, and communications equipment arranged around a central table. A weathered man in his 50s, wearing the insignia of a Navy SEAL commander, approached as they entered. "Agent Williams, this is the pilot who did the reconnaissance?" "Yes, Major Catherine Reynolds, Air Force. She has detailed intelligence on the target compound and has requested to join the extraction team." The commander studied Storm with evaluating eyes. Reynolds, any relation to the general? He's my father, Storm answered honestly. That would normally disqualify you immediately. His tone was matter of fact rather than judgmental. But I understand you've actually seen the compound today? Yes, sir. Completed aerial reconnaissance approximately 40 minutes ago. The commander considered this. We need every advantage we can get. This mission has significant constraints, limited time on target, unknown number of hostiles, and strict orders to avoid collateral damage. He made his decision. You're in, Major, but you follow orders without question. Is that clear? Absolutely clear, sir. Good. We launch in 50 minutes. Get geared up and join the mission briefing in 10. As the commander walked away, Williams handed Storm a secure phone. Direct line to me. I'll be coordinating from this end. If anything changes during the operation, I'm your contact. Storm nodded her thanks, then turned to Stevens. Captain, make sure they understand the patrol patterns we observed. The guards change position every 15 minutes, which gives us specific windows of opportunity. I will. Stevens extended his hand. Good luck, Major. Bring them home. Count on it. She shook his hand firmly, then moved to the equipment area where tactical gear was being distributed. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of focused preparation. Storm was issued combat equipment, communications gear, and a sidearm. She studied the mission plan, committing key details to memory while offering insights based on her observations of the compound. The extraction team consisted of 12 Navy SEALs and 4 Air Force pararescue specialists, elite operators accustomed to high-risk missions behind enemy lines. Storm noted their professional acceptance of her addition to the team, despite her last-minute inclusion. The mission commander outlined the plan with precise efficiency. 2 helicopters, stealth approach from the northeast, using the mountain ridges for terrain masking. Team Alpha will secure the perimeter and establish blocking positions here and here. He indicated the locations on the compound schematic. Team Bravo, with Major Reynolds, will enter the main building to locate and extract the hostages. He looked directly at Storm. Major, your sole responsibility is identification and initial security of the hostages. The extraction team will handle resistance and exfiltration. Clear? Clear, sir. We anticipate 20 to 30 armed hostiles on site. Intelligence suggests they're former military, not standard cartel soldiers. So expect disciplined resistance. He checked his watch. Wheels up in 10 minutes. Any questions? When none came, he concluded with stark simplicity. Mission objective is recovery of U.S. military personnel being held against their will. We go in fast, we get our people, we come out faster. Let's move. The team proceeded to the waiting helicopters, modified Blackhawks with enhanced stealth capabilities and specialized equipment for night operations. Storm boarded the lead aircraft, taking her assigned position among Team Bravo. The operators around her performed final equipment checks with methodical precision. The team leader, Master Chief Anderson, secured his helmet beside her. First time with a SEAL team, Major? Yes, Master Chief. He nodded. Stay close, move when we move, stop when we stop. If shooting starts, keep low and keep going. We'll handle the resistance. Understood. The helicopters lifted off as dusk approached, flying low and fast toward the border. Storm felt the familiar sensation of pre-mission focus settling over her, the narrowing of attention, the clarification of purpose, the acceptance of risk. The desert passed beneath them, bathed in the fading light of sunset. Storm thought of her father, picturing the window where she'd seen him signal. Robert Reynolds was a survivor, a warrior to his core. He would be ready when they came. Darkness enveloped them as they crossed the invisible line marking the international border. The pilot switched to night vision, maintaining terrain-hugging altitude to avoid detection. Storm monitored their progress on the tactical display, recognizing landmarks from her earlier reconnaissance flight. 10 minutes to target, the pilot announced over the intercom. Stand by for approach. The operators around Storm performed final weapons checks, their movements efficient even in the confined space of the helicopter cabin. No unnecessary words were spoken. These men communicated through practiced signals and shared understanding of the mission parameters. Storm checked her own equipment one last time, ensuring her communications gear was functioning and her sidearm secure but accessible. Her role was identification, not combat, but she was prepared to defend herself and the hostages if necessary. 5 minutes, came the update. No indication of detection. Approach proceeding as planned. The helicopters descended into a small clearing 2 kilometers from the compound, close enough for rapid approach, far enough to avoid alerting the guards. As they touched down, the teams deployed with practiced efficiency, securing the landing zone and establishing a defensive perimeter. "Move out," ordered the mission commander. "Maintain noise and light discipline." Storm joined Team Bravo, following their lead as they advanced through the forest toward the compound. The operators moved like shadows, their progress virtually silent despite the challenging terrain. Years of training and experience evident in every careful step. They paused at a ridge overlooking the compound. The mission commander used hand signals to deploy the teams according to plan. Team Alpha split off, circling to approach from multiple directions, while Team Bravo, with Storm, continued toward the main building. From their vantage point, Storm could see the compound was operating on reduced security. Many of the guard positions she'd observed earlier were now empty, suggesting overconfidence or possibly a shift change in progress. A stroke of luck they hadn't counted on, but would gladly exploit. The team advanced to the compound wall, using specialized equipment to scale it without detection. Once inside the perimeter, they moved from shadow to shadow, avoiding the pools of light cast by security lamps. Storm stayed close to Master Chief Anderson, matching his movements precisely. As they approached the main building, Team Alpha initiated their diversion, a carefully calculated disruption of the compound's power supply. Lights flickered, then went dark, plunging the compound into momentary confusion. Team Bravo moved immediately, entering the main building through a side entrance. The guard posted there had no time to react before being subdued silently by one of the operators. Storm followed the team inside, her night vision allowing her to navigate the darkened interior. "Upper floor, east side," she whispered to Anderson. "That's where I saw him." They moved through the building with methodical precision, neutralizing 2 more guards without raising an alarm. As they reached the staircase leading to the upper floor, muffled shouting could be heard from outside. The diversion was creating the desired chaos among the compound's defenders. The team ascended quickly, securing the upper hallway. Storm directed them toward the eastern section of the building, where multiple doors lined a long corridor. Time was critical now. The power would be restored soon, and the advantage of surprise would be lost. The operators moved down the corridor, checking each room with practiced efficiency. 2 were empty. 1 contained sleeping guards who were swiftly subdued. At the 4th door, they encountered resistance, a guard who managed to fire once before being neutralized. The mission's stealth component was now compromised. "Move fast," Anderson ordered. "We've lost the element of surprise." They accelerated their pace, checking the remaining rooms in rapid succession. Storm's heart pounded as each door revealed either empty spaces or hostile forces, but not her father. Finally, at the end of the corridor, they reached a heavy wooden door secured with multiple locks. 2 operators made short work of the obstacles, while others maintained security positions. As the door swung open, Storm moved forward with Anderson, entering a room that had been converted into an improvised prison cell. In the dim emergency lighting, she saw 2 figures against the far wall, one supporting the other. "U.S. military," Anderson announced. "We're here to extract you." The standing figure turned, revealing the familiar features of Colonel Harrison, though now bruised and bloodied. "About damn time," he managed, his voice hoarse but determined. Beside him, supported against the wall but conscious, was Lieutenant General Robert Reynolds. His uniform was torn, his face bearing evidence of harsh treatment, but his eyes remained alert and defiant. "Father," Storm stepped forward, momentary emotion breaking through her professional demeanor. Robert Reynolds' eyes widened in recognition. "Catherine?" Then his military bearing reasserted itself. "What's the situation, Major?" The question, so typical of her father even in these circumstances, nearly made Storm smile. "Extraction team is securing the compound, sir. We have helicopters waiting 2 kilometers east. Can you walk?" "With assistance," Harrison answered for both of them. "The general's leg is injured but not broken." Anderson immediately assigned 2 operators to assist the officers. "We need to move now. Team Alpha reports cartel reinforcements approaching from the south." Storm helped secure her father's arm around her shoulder, supporting his weight as they moved back toward the staircase. Despite his injuries, Robert maintained the dignified bearing that had defined his military career. "I knew you'd come," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "though I expected you'd follow proper protocols and authorization channels." Even now, he couldn't resist the mild reprimand. Storm found it oddly reassuring. "Sometimes the proper channel is too slow, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your mother would agree with you. They descended the stairs carefully, rejoining the rest of Team Bravo at the building's entrance. Outside, sporadic gunfire indicated Team Alpha was engaged with compound security forces. Team Alpha, status report, Anderson requested over the tactical radio. Southern perimeter compromised. Estimate 24 hostiles engaging. We're holding but need immediate extraction. Anderson made the call instantly. All teams fall back to extraction point. Covering fire, leapfrog pattern. Bravo team has packages secure. The carefully orchestrated withdrawal began, with teams providing covering fire for each other as they retreated through the compound. Storm focused on helping her father navigate the difficult terrain, gratified to see him fighting through his pain with characteristic determination. As they reached the compound wall, the situation deteriorated. Cartel reinforcements had arrived in force, their gunfire becoming increasingly accurate as they organized their response. Team Alpha had suffered one casualty, a non-fatal wound, but the injured operator required assistance that slowed their movement. Helicopters inbound, came the report over the tactical radio. LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is hot. They pushed through the forest, the sounds of pursuit growing behind them. Storm could feel her father weakening beside her, his injuries and the difficult terrain taking their toll on his endurance. Yet he continued forward, refusing to become a liability to the mission. When they reached the clearing, the helicopters were already there, rotors spinning, crew chiefs providing covering fire from mounted weapons. Team Alpha reached the extraction point first, loading their wounded and establishing a defensive perimeter. Go, Harrison urged as they approached the lead helicopter. Get the general out first. Storm helped her father into the aircraft, securing him in a seat before turning to assist Harrison. Around them, the extraction team maintained a disciplined withdrawal, each operator covering others until all were aboard. All personnel accounted for, Anderson confirmed. Execute immediate departure. The helicopters lifted off as cartel forces reached the edge of the clearing, their gunfire pinging harmlessly against the armored underside of the aircraft. Within moments, they were above the forest canopy, accelerating away from the compound toward the border and safety. In the relative security of the helicopter cabin, Storm finally allowed herself a moment to assess her father's condition. His injuries were significant, but not life-threatening. Contusions, possibly cracked ribs, and a leg injury that would require medical attention, but seemed unlikely to cause permanent damage. Robert Reynolds sat upright despite his pain, maintaining the posture of command even as a medic attended to his wounds. His eyes met Storm's, communicating what words between them often could not. "You disobeyed orders," he stated, though without his usual disapproval. "Yes, sir. Risked your career, possibly your freedom." "Yes, sir." Robert nodded once, a gesture that contained multitudes. Good. The single word carried more approval than any elaborate praise he might have offered. Storm understood what remained unspoken, that some principles transcended regulations, that loyalty and duty sometimes required breaking the very rules designed to uphold them. "Your mother would be proud," he added, echoing his words from their last meeting at the Border Patrol station. "She always said you had better judgment than I gave you credit for." "She was usually right," Storm replied, allowing a small smile. "Usually." Robert raised an eyebrow, then winced as the medic addressed a particularly painful wound. "Always," Storm corrected, her smile widening slightly. As the helicopters crossed back into U.S. airspace, Storm felt the tension of the past 24 hours begin to ease. The mission wasn't over. There would be debriefings, medical evaluations, and undoubtedly consequences for her unauthorized actions. But the essential objective had been achieved. Her father and Colonel Harrison were alive and safe. The cartel's attempt to extract military intelligence and leverage high-ranking officers had failed. The desert passed beneath them, now friendly territory once more. In the east, the first hints of dawn lightened the horizon. A new day approaching. Storm thought about Miguel Sanchez and his children, now safely in witness protection, beginning their journey toward a normal life. She thought about the cartel's network of corruption that would soon face justice, thanks to Sanchez's testimony. Most of all, she thought about the lesson she had learned through this crucible, that true service sometimes required breaking the rules, that courage meant following your moral compass even when it diverged from established protocols. It was a lesson her father had taught her, though perhaps not in the way he'd intended. Robert Reynolds watched his daughter from across the helicopter cabin, his military bearing intact despite his injuries. In her face, he saw echoes of Margaret, the same determination, the same willingness to risk everything for what mattered most. Perhaps he had been too harsh in his judgment all these years, too rigid in his adherence to structure and protocol. Catherine had proven herself not just a skilled officer, but a leader who understood the true meaning of duty. The helicopters approached Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where medical teams awaited their arrival. As they began their descent, Robert reached across to take his daughter's hand, a rare gesture of affection from a man who had always maintained professional distance. "When this is over," he said, "we should talk, really talk, about your mother, about these past 15 years, about what comes next." Storm squeezed his hand gently, mindful of his injuries. "I'd like that, sir." "Robert," he corrected. "When we're not in uniform, I think it's time you called me Robert." The helicopters touched down on the tarmac, medical teams rushing forward as the rotor slowed. Storm helped ease her father onto a waiting stretcher, then stepped back to allow the professionals to work. Colonel Harrison, being transferred to his own stretcher nearby, caught her eye. "Major Reynolds," he called. "Whatever happens next, remember this. Some missions aren't measured by adherence to protocol, but by adherence to principle. You passed that test with flying colors." Storm nodded her appreciation, watching as both officers were loaded into ambulances for transport to the base hospital. The mission commander approached, his expression unreadable. "Major, you're needed for immediate debriefing. Agent Williams is waiting in the Tactical Operations Center." "Of course," Storm acknowledged. Whatever consequences awaited, she would face them directly. As she walked across the tarmac, the rising sun cast her shadow long behind her. Whatever came next, commendation or court-martial, continued service or civilian life, she had remained true to the values that mattered most. She had honored both her father's lifelong example of duty and her mother's legacy of compassion and moral courage. The fusion of those inheritances, Robert's discipline and Margaret's heart, had guided her through this crisis. And in the process, perhaps both she and her father had learned that these seemingly opposing forces could work together, creating something stronger than either alone. Storm smiled slightly as she entered the base complex. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The winds of duty and the currents of compassion had brought her here. Now, like the skilled pilot she was, she would navigate whatever storms lay ahead. A note from the writer. Dear friends, thank you for journeying with Major Catherine Storm Reynolds through this story of duty, family, and redemption. I wanted to share a few thoughts about why this tale might resonate with many of us, especially those of us who've lived long enough to understand that life's most important lessons often come wrapped in conflict and difficulty. This is fundamentally a story about reconciliation, between a father and daughter, between duty and compassion, between following orders and following your conscience. If you're reading this and you're over 50, chances are you've faced some version of these dilemmas yourself. Maybe you've struggled with a parent who couldn't express love except through criticism. Maybe you've had to choose between what the rulebook said and what your heart knew was right. Maybe you've carried the weight of someone's legacy while trying to forge your own path. Catherine's journey mirrors something many of us experience, the realization that our parents were more complex than we gave them credit for, that their apparent coldness might have been their own form of protection, that the qualities they criticized in us might actually be gifts from another parent we've lost. The story of Robert and Margaret Reynolds, playing out through their daughter 15 years after Margaret's death, is really about how we carry our loved ones forward, how we become, in our own way, the fusion of everyone who shaped us. I also wanted to write about courage that doesn't look like the movies. Catherine's bravery isn't just in flying fighter jets or defying orders. It's in the quiet moment when she calls her father knowing he'll disapprove, in her willingness to risk everything for children she doesn't know, in her decision to complete her mission even when her heart is breaking with worry. That's the kind of courage that sustains us through the long haul of life. Not dramatic gestures, but the daily choice to do what's right even when it costs us. For those of us who've served in uniform or loved someone who has, there's an added dimension here. The military teaches us about duty, honor, and sacrifice, but it doesn't always teach us how to reconcile those values with the messy, complicated, heartbreaking reality of human relationships. Robert Reynolds is a good officer who struggles to be a good father. Catherine is a good daughter who has to become her own kind of officer. Both of them have to learn that following your conscience isn't the same as following your impulses, that true integrity requires both head and heart. I hope you found something meaningful in this story. Maybe it reminded you of your own complicated relationships with parents or children. Maybe it made you think about times when you had to choose between safety and conscience. Maybe it just gave you a few hours of escape into a world of high-stakes action and ultimate redemption. Whatever you took from these pages, know that it was written with deep respect for everyone who's ever had to navigate the difficult terrain between duty and love, between legacy and independence, between the person you were raised to be and the person you choose to become. Thank you for reading. May you find your own balance between discipline and compassion, between honoring the past and creating your future. With gratitude and respect, your storyteller.